Sure. I will go ahead and call the Village of Essex Junction Board of Trustees to order for August 20th.
And I will call the Town of Essex Selectboard to order for August 20th. Andrew, would you mind if I do a little housekeeping and do the early things in the agenda?
Go right ahead.
So, are there any agenda additions or changes from board members or staff?
No, just a couple of minor points about tonight. Dan Richardson, our attorney, will be available after 7:30. I also have Susan McNamara Hill, our town clerk, available if there are any timing questions about ballots and other things. She may bounce off a little bit, but she said I could text her and she'd come back.
It's much appreciated. Thank you very much, Susan. I would like to propose or remind folks that we had some little changes to the format of the meeting that were suggested at the Select Board's meeting on Monday that we apply to tonight's meeting. So during our public to be heard, we're gonna use that as not just for items that are not on the agenda, but also for the agenda itself. So we'll have a public to be heard, and then we'll discuss our business items. And then at 8:30, we'll take a pause to check in and see where we are in the process. And at that time, also take more public input before deciding to continue or not. And then we only have 2 discussion items, possible action items on the agenda. So as long as that's okay with the boards, the select board discussed this on Monday, but we didn't have a chance to share that procedure with the trustees. You're muted, Andrew.
I don't think I had done that yet. From my perspective, I'm fine with it. I'd like to hear from other trustees if anybody feels differently.
I'm not totally clear on how it works, but I'm game.
We'll make it as clear as possible. Thank you, George.
Sounds good.
So since there were no changes to the agenda, we will, other than the public speaking, we will move on. So when we have public to be heard, just a reminder, we have quite a few people in the audience. So please keep your microphones muted unless you are speaking. And when you're done speaking, turn your mic off and lower your hand. Please only expect to speak once and keep your comments to no more than 2 minutes. And comments only, and they should be directed at the chairs. We are not going to have the time or the ability to do back and forth conversation. That's not the point of public to be heard. Definitely just make your comments to the chairs. And please make sure you state your full name when you speak so that your name can get in the minutes properly. And if you wish to speak, you can raise your hand in the toolbar, or you can indicate your wish to speak in the chat. Otherwise, please do not use the chat for any other purpose. And I don't think we have anybody phoning in, just using their phone. But if you are on the phone, just give it a shout when you want to speak at the time of public input. So that's all I had for housekeeping. So please, if you'd like to speak at this point in the meeting, please raise your hand or indicate in the chat that you'd like to speak.
Hi, this is Andy Watts. Just want to let you know I've joined.
Hi, Andy. Dawn, did you just raise your hand?
I did, Madam Chair. Don't we need to approve the agenda before we open it to public to be heard?
So we did not make any substantive changes to the agenda. It's up to you if you'd like to go through that formality. Okay, we didn't add any business to the agenda.
Sounds good.
So if there's anyone in the audience who would like to speak at this time, please feel free to indicate by raising your hand or stating so in the chat.
Raj, I think you're getting some feedback from your line.
Pardon me, Andrew?
Trying to tell Raj that we were getting some feedback from his line.
Oh. It looked like Sarah Macy had her hand up. Did you need to speak, Sarah?
No, I meant to click the chat icon to see what was happening, and I clicked the wrong button. All good.
No problem. It's nice to hear your voice anyway.
Andrew, you sure that's me?
I don't hear it anymore, so I'm not sure.
Okay.
Okay, I see a hand up from Ken Signorello.
Am I the only one? Can't believe it.
It appears to be so.
Good evening, folks. How are you all? Tonight, I'd like to tell you about two small towns in Maine, Mapleton and Castle Hill. They began working together in 1947 to provide common services to all of their residents. A third town, Chapman, joined them in 1974. They formalized their three-way agreement with an interlocal agreement. Each of these towns has its own 5-member select board that makes local decisions, but they come together in a 15-member select board to make decisions that affect the 3 communities as though they were one entity. They share a town manager, treasurer, 3 clerks, highway department, assorted other things. They've managed to stay separate but share. Now, I'm telling you about these towns because I want you to consider, is what you have in front of you the best we can do? I know I appeared out of the blue just a year ago. What can I possibly have to offer that would make it worth getting off the merger track? Could there be something other than the same solution that's failed repeatedly since 1958? You have in front of you a proposed solution to host a number of problems. I'm not going to argue it either way, one way or the other. That's for you to do. You each have your constituents to represent. I understand that. And especially for the select board, that constituency is quite diverse. Farmers to apartment dwellers. Each part of town tends to solve problems in different ways. Affordable housing is one of the things I hear about constantly. So I've heard recently talk outside the village of possibly tiny house communities, whereas, of course, in the village, there's apartment houses. Well, what about affordable agriculture? With climate change happening, I think that we should be thinking outside of the box a bit and including some of the history and the agriculture that we have in Essex and try to help that continue to grow to support that.
10 seconds, Ken.
Thank you. You must consider the impact of a tax shift. Gradual, I'll grant you. But is this worth embarking on 2 months of heated debate? Is it worth reigniting the animosity that flares up after each merger vote? Does it really merge the unmergeable holdouts? Is this the best we can do?
Ken, thank you very much for your comments. It's over 2 minutes.
One last line. Last week, the trustees
Ken,
wondered.
it's over 2 minutes. Thank you very much.
We need to set a higher bar. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else wish to speak? Okay, I'm not seeing anyone in the chat, and I'm not seeing anyone in the raising their hands, so we're going to move on to business item 5A, discussion and possible action to finalize the amended draft merger charter language. So I'd like to ask, the select board received a letter from the trustees regarding holding this meeting and discussing the final changes to the merger charter, but we haven't heard in person, and we thought it might be a good opportunity to hear directly from the trustees why they asked us to do this and why they're moving forward with this. So I would, Andrew, if you and the trustees would like to just take the time and space to express yourselves on this, I think we'd all really appreciate that.
Sure. And I would just like to, for clarity, make sure that the rest of the trustees know that when I speak, it is only for me as one elected official. It is not for the rest of the trustees. So please feel free to chime in should anything I say not agree with you, or just to say what you feel you need to say. one of the reasons why I have been desiring for this vote to happen come November is we know that in a presidential election, that is the absolute most significant turnout that we will receive. The turnout during presidential elections is significantly higher than what happens during our regular town meeting, during our village meeting. Certainly the turnout is significantly higher than during our regular meetings such as we have tonight. So for me, the opportunity to hear from as many voices as possible on an issue which will absolutely impact every resident as possible, to my core, is important. If we wait, that's something that will very likely result in fewer individuals being able to have their voices heard on this issue. As we all hear from the Secretary of State, your vote is your voice. So we need to make sure that our residents have the opportunity to voice, and the most official way to do that is through a vote. So that's one of the biggest reasons for me as to why I've been wanting for this to happen now. The other reason related to that is that with the likely procedures we're going to have for mail-in voting come November, the opportunity to, again, have more people have the opportunity to vote. Whether that's something that will continue beyond November, we don't know that. Whether that's something that may happen again in 4 more years, we don't know that. So I'd like to be able to take advantage of these opportunities that we have in front of us. Additionally, this is something that's been talked around in our community for longer than I have been alive. This is not something new. The things that are new are things like the 12-year phase-in of taxes from the village. That's new. Other than that, these things have been talked about for a long time. New residents may not know about it. As we saw from the KSV survey, the overwhelming majority of people who voted or who responded to that survey have been around here for a while and have had this conversation before and understand what's going on. So again, for me, what it really comes down to is this isn't new. This is the same conversation we've had for a while. Let's allow for the most amount of people possible to vote on it so that we can move on, so we can get some final resolution. So I would also like to open it up to other trustees in case there's other things that you really want to make sure get addressed as to why. George, go right ahead.
I'm happy to go, but I think that Dan raised his hand, so I'll defer. Dan, why don't you go, and then I'll speak after you. Thanks.
I mean, I just echo what Andrew has said, and just add that it's also not only the business or the residents of the community, but it's the businesses as well. Business owners that have property here in the village are subject to the same issues, but don't get a vote in this issue. So that's something that is not heard. So I just want to make sure that's present in people's minds on this. Thank you.
I'm happy to go, but Raj or Amber, if you want to go, just jump in.
Seems like it's you, George.
Okay, I'll start off by saying I agree with both Andrew and Dan, but I want to add another dimension to it, and I'd start off by saying I think we've reached a point in our relationship with the two boards where it's really important that we don't misread each other's intentions. And I'm going to say right now, I don't, and as Andrew said, I don't want to say I'm speaking for the rest of the trustees, but I think maybe I'm sharing their thoughts a little bit here. We're not understanding the intentions of the select board right now. And if you could just bear with me to give you a little bit of context, we started on the merger charter 3 years ago, committed as two boards to seeing this thing through. And as most of us know, we put an enormous amount of time and effort and resources into it, staff resources, consulting resources, trying to finally do it right and finally reach the goal line and get the community merged. And last February, the governance subcommittee came to the two full boards, and we came up with the two main pillars of a merger plan, the representation model and the finance model. And after a lengthy discussion, we received the unanimous vote of the select board and the trustees to have me go to the Government Operations Committee in the legislature and tell them about what we were doing. And because there was some complexity to it, we wanted to make sure that we were on the right track. And we did. We contacted them, and they told us that we were on the right track. They liked what we were doing. Dan Richardson contacted the tax department. Shortly after that, we then held it, as most of us know, we had a joint meeting at Essex High School, to which we invited all the state representatives from Essex Junction and Essex Town, and the state senators from Chittenden County. And we presented the outline of our merger plan. At no time during that process did anyone on the select board or the trustees say, I don't like what we're doing. I don't like the direction this is headed in. I don't like the process we're using. It seemed to me, and I think any reasonable person who was following this would have said, this is a 10-member group that is on track and they're moving ahead with this. Okay? So after that meeting, we then started working on the actual nuts and bolts of the merger, as you all know, as most of us know. And around that time, the 3-3 charter proposal went down to the GovOps committee. They set it aside because of its multiple technical flaws, as we had anticipated. And then the pandemic came. And when that happened, we were pretty far along in completing the merger charter. And one of the copies in your packet tonight has where we had left off. It had a lot of questions in it, and a lot of possible insertions, but it was pretty far along. In my mind, I think if you looked at it, I think it was a document that had gone over the hill and it was nearing the finish line. But then we started talking about suspending everything because of the pandemic. We wanted to give staff the time to catch up. They were very busy. We wanted to take, free up staff time, meeting time to deal with other things. And so I think we were kind of on the verge of saying, fine, let's put this on hold. So this was all a very roundabout way of bringing me to this point. What I meant about not understanding each other's intentions, because then we learned that the select board was now going to pursue 2 amendments to the town charter. And here's the problem I have with that. And we'll discuss this later, but why would you be seeking to amend the town charter when your priority is to dissolve the town charter and go forward with a merger charter? The 2 things are contradictory. And Sarah Copeland-Hansis, in her letter to you, had said, we're not doing anything that isn't urgent and necessary. And so why would you send her a 1 charter proposal and possibly 2? I'm including your letter to her for clarity on the 3-3 charter proposal. Why would you do that when it is your intention to dissolve the town charter and put a merger charter in place? Why would you ask them at this stage, when they are saying they only do really essential work, please stop what you're doing. This is essential work to do this. And by the way, we may have a successful merger vote and all the work, this work that you're doing will be thrown out the window. So that's confusing. And my interpretation, and I think I'm speaking for the other trustees as well, is that merger no longer has the priority that it's had for the last 3 years with the select board. There's no sense in me mincing words. It's like the Fellowship of the Rings. We were like the Fellowship, and I feel the Fellowship is kind of crumbling. And the issue is, that's fine. You have new members on your board. They are not totally up to speed on a lot of the things that went on, and I don't mean that in any way as an insult or criticism, Dawn and Vince, but I understand that you haven't been engaged and involved in this stuff over the last few years. It seems like you have a lot of internal discussion, things that you want to work out. But from our perspective, I think we've finished. We've essentially finished the nuts, the main pillars and outlines of the merger charter. And what we're hearing from you is a sense that, no, maybe we're not finished. You want to go back and start over again. You want to pursue some other process. you want to have some kind of a negotiation. And so, in my mind, besides the reasons that Andrew and Dan stated, in my mind, putting the merger charter on the ballot in November does several things. First of all, it locks it in place. It says, here's what we've done. We're going to honor the work that the select board and the trustees have done for the last 3 years, because you very much participated in this with us. It's a fair charter. It's thoughtful. It's intelligent. It's got excellent. It represents an excellent body of work. And so, if we pass that, it's in place, and it's an open invitation to the town to join us. Okay. Also, what it does, and this is, again, we can speak to this. It gives us an opportunity, because it will contain the details of finance and governance. It gives us an opportunity to have a really good conversation with our village constituents. And here's why. Because let's be completely realistic. Let's look at the history. Okay, let's understand what's really likely to happen. Okay, in the Fellowship of the Ring analogy, chances are we're not going to get to throw the ring into the fire. Okay, chances are, very high likelihood, that no matter what we do, if the town puts the merger charter on the ballot in March or April, it's gonna fail. Okay, for the select board, well, it's bad, but it's business as usual. The money flows from the village into the town coffers, and life goes on, and things are good. For the village, it's a disaster. It means we've spent the last 3 years putting all this energy and time into a merger charter and come up empty-handed. And then where are we? We're back to where we've been for years, okay? Sending millions of dollars to the town to pay for services and benefits that we don't receive, and then having to pay for those benefits ourselves. And I'm sorry to be so direct. I'm trying not to be offensive, but I think I speak for the trustees on that matter and for a lot of people in the village. So this time around, we can't have that. This time around, if merger fails, we need to have a backup plan. And for us to have a backup plan in place, we need to have a conversation. And for us to have a conversation, the best opportunity for us to begin to have a conversation is by putting the merger ballot on the merger charter on the ballot in November. In addition, by doing this, it takes the pressure off our two boards to try to meet over the next 3 or 4 or 5 months. You know where we stand, you know where we are, and the select board, you can have an internal discussion about where you want to go. I know this might sound coercive, like we're trying to force the issue. We're really not. I really wish you would understand that. This is not trying to be coercive, okay? But we can't go back and rebuild something that we've done over the last 3 years. And we need to get a very clear signal from the select board about where you stand on all this. So in my mind, that's why I think we need to put the merger ballot on the charter on the ballot in November. And I'll see what perhaps Amber and Raj have to say. Thanks.
Amber or Raj?
I think George pretty much covered it. I mean, I think the only thing I'd add is that, I came into this kind of late, and the decision had been made long before I kind of got on board with putting this on the November ballot. And so we've all been working really hard to get to that point. And I guess I was under the assumption that but for COVID, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. We would have had it finalized. We would be just moving forward. So, we spent a lot of time the other night working through the draft charter, and I think it looks pretty good. And so I'm hoping you guys got to see that, and looking forward to your thoughts on it.
I'll go last. This is Raj. I'm just not going to repeat everything everybody said. I'm just, I think we're very close. I'm interested to see if we can get together as the two boards and get this across the finish line. I'm optimistic. And I'm really interested to hear what the select board has to say about any changes that you may not have seen, because most of this will be very familiar, I believe. So I'm very interested to hear your feedback, and I'm hopeful we can move forward.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the honesty that all of you shared. Those were some difficult things for you to say and for us to hear, and I appreciate it. But before we get into the nuts and bolts of discussing the charter, I think members of the select board might want to share their feelings about what they just heard and what they're thinking, if that would be okay with the trustees.
Absolutely.
So I will open it up to select board members. I see Pat and is that Andy? Pat. I see Pat's hand has gone up. Go ahead, Pat.
Unmute. Awesome. Thanks, Elaine, and thank you, trustees. George, especially, I appreciate the full detail. I mean, I certainly, from the select board standpoint, there's a few things going on here. It's certainly finishing the charter, the trustees doing it on their own, puts the select board really over a barrel that feels uncomfortable. I understand the reason for doing it. I mean, as has come up, not by myself, but as I think some members of the public like to say, the select board can act unilaterally. Well, people forget that the village trustees can act unilaterally as well to do what they need to do. That doesn't always feel good, though, when you have negotiating partners, which is what we are in this situation. And I think that it is really crucial for us to bear in mind that while either of our two boards have their own purview under which they can act on their own, that doesn't always make it right. And it certainly doesn't make it easy for the other boards to then act when one board goes and makes a decision. I think it's good for both of us, to the two boards to act with that. Again, I think, as Andrew said, I can speak for myself as a select board member only for this portion of it. Why I feel that we need to delay is that I think merger is the best option for our two communities by far. And I think that overwhelmingly what I'm hearing right now is that the town outside the village will not pass merger until they get a definitive answer on the 3+3 vote. I think that's why I felt that the clarification to government ops was necessary. I think you're right, George, in that it maybe should have been clear enough when they tabled it that should have been the end of it. But for whatever reason, there's still a lot of push in the community to hear a yes or a no. And until we get that, and I feel that that's why we need to put that in a letter, that no matter what we did, even if we put a merger vote on in November, quite simply, it was going to be a no. I do not feel comfortable putting a charter on for a vote in November, even if I feel it's going to be representative of a totality of a community. If most of the portion of a community that needs to sort of pass that is telling me they're absolutely not voting for it until they get an answer on this merger, or excuse me, this 3+3 that was passed previously. I don't like it necessarily, but I think I've said that. I think 3+3 in and of itself, I have problems with. Certainly never been shy of being vocal about that. So by sending the letter to government ops, it was not to try to persuade them, or at least in my opinion, to say, please accept this. It was to say, we need an answer, because without it, a big portion of our community is just going to flat out say, no merger until we know for sure. And it's a very difficult situation to be in, but that's just why, from my perspective, November is really difficult to work with until we have an answer for that, because I feel that we would be putting it on a ballot just to know that it's going to be defeated.
Pat, thank you. Vince, you're muted.
Oh, hey, how about that? Yeah, I just want to echo what Pat said. I want merger to pass. I don't want it to just die. And that's the feeling that we've been getting too, and the response we've been getting from the TOV residents is that that if 3+3 is not settled, merger is not going to happen. I don't know how true that is. I mean, I'm more than willing to go forward with the trustees and put this on the ballot in November. My personal thoughts, though, are that a merger vote in November is probably not going to succeed. I'm kind of sitting with George on that one. And, I wanted to be part of a successful merger that works for everybody. And that's the main reason why I considered slowing down, like taking a more measured approach and let's see if we can get closer. Let's see if we can get what some of our residents want, by addressing 3+3 and get that out of the way. I mean, I can see, George, I can totally see your points. Like, we've been in this partnership together. The boards have been in this partnership together. Now you have new people. Now, we're trying to just figure this out. And that's where I'm coming from, is I'm trying to figure this out. I'm trying to educate myself as much as possible about this. And I can't do it when everything's happening at the speed of light. Yeah. And I mean, some of that is just, I'm going to have to take some of my colleagues' opinions and try to check them and make sure they hold water, and then do what I see as best. I mean, I can't do any more than that. With the information that I have and the limited background that I have, but what I'm seeing and what I'm feeling is that merger's not really going to be successful from the people in the TOV. Mm-hmm. So that's why I advocated for slowing down and going a little slower. So anyway, I hope that kind of brings a little understanding to it. I'm more than willing, if November is the date and we have to do it in November, and if we just need to get this off our plate and so that we can go forward, I'm more than willing to go forward with you folks. But I think to do it successfully, we're going to have to probably stop and put it on another ballot somewhere. But I could go either way on this one, depending on what the boards want to do. I don't really have. I lean toward delaying, but if it's something we feel we'll be successful with, or at least that'll move us forward, then maybe that's something that we should do sooner rather than later.
Thanks, Vince. Andy, your hand is up.
Yeah, the other thing that George didn't mention with regard to the story of why we slowed down was that we didn't feel we had a good way to engage with the public and get public comment. Certainly here we are with 3 meetings crammed into the same week, and we get we had one person comment this morning or this evening from the public so far. So that's one of my huge concerns. It's another thing that we had agreed to. We've talked about a number of, that we had long-standing agreements on how we're going to do this, and getting public input and participation was a keystone part of that, and we're not allowing that this week. We're severely limiting it. And so that, to me, is a major issue with going forward with something with a deadline that's tomorrow. The first ballots go out on September 19th. So we have to have a completely closed charter before the first ballots get sent overseas to folks that request them. I understand that it's not going to be on the ballot, but I think we should have it finalized by then. And I don't see how we'll get public input. And as usual, I've got several pages of comments here. There are two of them that are things that I'm willing to die on the hill for, that I won't bend on. I don't know if you want to hear them now or if that's the discussion we get later.
No, you should. Let's hear them.
Elaine, I don't know if you want my issues now or...
I think your two very important priorities, you should just list them, Andy, and then we'll discuss them in depth when we get to that part.
Okay, so the first one is 3+3. To address the question that Vince was bringing up, if 3+3 is in the charter we take forward, then it's in the charter and it will get answered, or it's in the charter proposal that goes to the public, so discussion later, right? So it's 3+3, and the other is there's a section in there that gives the select board the right to criticize town employees. And I adamantly am against that as well. That's another one that, if it's in there, I will not support the charter with that language in there. And then, there's another, 2.5 pages of things that I think are ambiguous and need to be corrected. But I think those are my main points.
The section you're referring to, Andy, is 307B. Thank you. Dawn?
Well, as a newcomer, it's okay, George. I don't understand the rush. This is probably going to be our final time to do this, and I want to get everything lined up so that there can be no more objections to what they see or hear. I have a problem, as Andy does, with a lack of support for 3.3 because they did vote on it, and we're here to represent the voters of Essex. And I have a problem with no public input on the proposed charter. I need to hear feedback from the people because this is going to be a change for some. And the other one I would really like to wait for is the financial report that Sarah's going to have out on the 28th. And there's been a lot of people that want to see that before making their decision. So I don't think we're ready to put it on the ballot for November.
Thank you, Dawn. I agree with all of my colleagues on the select board. I have a list, and they've hit all the high notes on that list. A couple other things, or just one other thing and this is a process thing that I'm trying to understand. If the village puts a completed charter on the village ballot and village residents approve it, then I'm assuming the intention is that the trustees would say, this is what this half of the town wants. And you would deliver it to us and say, this has been approved, and this was not a straw poll because it's a lot more official than that, but this is evidence that this is supported in at least half the town. But there are, as you heard, specific priorities that board members on the select board have that are extremely important. One of which is a citizen approved vote. So the delay on that is not, we are compelled to pursue that because our voters approved it. And so that is why we contacted the government ops with the clarifications, and we asked them very specifically, please give us a ruling on this. It has caused so much contention in our community. Please help us out by giving us clarity. So by putting having voters in the village approve a charter that we fundamentally disagree with on that one point, if that charter is approved and then it comes to us, we would still have to negotiate that point. And if the trustees and the board, select board, come to a new agreement and there are other edits or changes made, then you're going to have to go back to the village voters with another charter, an updated charter. Mm-hmm. To me, that appears confusing as a voter and costly and inconvenient. It just, from a process perspective, I'm not understanding it. So I just need to lay that out there. I'd like to make some suggestions, and I hope that you'll accept them in the spirit of trying to move forward. I know that the delays, not just COVID, let's be honest, it wasn't COVID only, it's us. The select board is very deliberate and slow in doing our business, and that has held you up before, and it continues to hold you up. You have a different dynamic on your board, and I know it well because I've been there. So I understand your frustration with the process. And most importantly, I totally understand village residents are paying taxes for services that they're not getting. They can't afford to keep doing that, and they want change now. I really understand that. And so, COVID notwithstanding, what I would really love to see tonight, what I really think would be the best move forward for both boards, is if we agreed together to hold a vote on merger at town meeting 2021. We would have to finish work on that before the holidays, because holidays will just, everything will fall apart at that point in time. And there are all of the deadlines that we have to meet for getting things on the ballot. That doesn't change regardless of when we hold a vote. Between now and Thanksgiving, we hold whatever remaining conversations we need to have about the charter. Andy's list is long, but there's a lot on it that we could address very quickly, and there's some on it that we really need to sit down and discuss still. At the same time, we review those figures that were requested by the public from our finance director, and she said she would have them for us on September 28th. We have to look at those numbers. We haven't finalized the 12-year plan. We haven't finalized the numbers enough to share them confidently with the public. So we need that time to review the numbers and make the necessary adjustments. We work from now until Thanksgiving to make those changes, have those discussions, and then go out to the public for the feedback we're gonna need. We can't, I just don't think that this conversation this evening and then a vote to put it on the ballot in November it's short shrift for the public. It's just, there's no time for them to digest this document. They haven't really seen this document. We haven't gone out and said, okay, here it is, have a look and let us know. So I really urge both boards to commit to March. And then we spend January and February educating the public on what we've worked on for 3 years now. We are so close. And I'm asking you to please stay at the table with us. Work with us until December or Thanksgiving to complete the charter, analyze the numbers together, put the merger on a ballot in March together. We are almost there. So I'm really asking you to please, let's get there together.
Thank you, Elaine. As I don't want to disrupt the process, if you don't mind, there's a couple of things that I would like to just be able to respond with. First off is, again, speaking only for myself, my desire and the impetus for doing this is to stay at the table. It is not to disrupt our place at the table as a partner with the select board. What we can do is, if there is no agreement in terms of some of those items that Andy, I don't remember the exact phrase you use about this is the mountain you die on, or the something like that. If we can't come to consensus on those, or if it's just 3 plus 3, then what we could do as two boards is come to agreement on everything else. The village, if we can do that tonight, we can go forward and we can put that on the ballot. And then with whatever happens with 3 plus 3 from the legislator's perspective, if that ends up not being passed, then we can keep 3 plus 3 plus 1 as we already have in the village's charter, and that could then go on the town's ballot. Since it has already been voted upon in the village doesn't need to vote on it in a special ballot. They can vote as members of the town. So that could take care of that process. And Patrick, I do want to agree with you. It doesn't feel good when a partner goes ahead and unilaterally makes a decision without the other. You're absolutely right. I think you know how that felt, or how that feels now, and I think you know where I'm going as to how that may have felt for us at a previous meeting. I'm happy to hear that some people do want to continue to go forward, and I don't disagree. It very well likely may fail in the town outside the village. Again, we can get the highest turnout possible so that residents can have their official say through an official vote. We can do what we can to have that, to see that through. We can do what we can to educate the members of the public. Or we could delay. And as was said at the last select board meeting, there is no guarantee. I would have hearing that promise to work towards an agreed upon merger charter for a town meeting. Thank you. That sounds nice. Yep. At the same time, we agreed to work towards November. Something else happened that none of us would have predicted. I'm talking about the pandemic, which caused a delay. We don't know what the future holds. This has been a conversation that's been going on for, again, longer than I've been alive. I am literal proof that this conversation has been going on for a very long time. So doing it in November, we can get some final responses. We can move on from this. At least from the village's side, we can figure out whether we're going down the right path or not. I'd like to do that with the select board. I'd love to do that with the town. I also have ran on merger because I do believe that that's the best path forward. That was it for my comments. I see that Raj has his hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Thanks.
Raj, you're muted again.
Muted, Raj. Raj, you muted.
Okay. I think it's going to stay this time. All right. I keep hitting it. You know, I'm old. I appreciate the thoughts from the select board members. And I get it. You know, I've heard the first few, I think it was Pat, Vince, basically everybody, kind of indicating, you know, their concern about the town outside the village voters and how they're going to feel about it. My knee-jerk reaction was half of your constituency is not town outside the village voters. It is village voters. And I don't say that as if you don't know that. I realize, of course, you know that. But as a listener, when I was listening carefully, I was dismayed for the 11,200 and some odd village voters that were sort of left out of that thought process when it was being described as, I don't know if the town's going to go for that. Certainly the village voters weren't in that thought process, at least the way it sounded. And I'm not trying to beat anybody up. I'm just reflecting back. Regardless of where we go, the select board, as you know, represents all 22,000 plus. Half of your constituents may not like this. The other half are begging for some kind of relief. We're asked to be very cautious and careful and thoughtful about any tax increases that happen to the town outside the village. And I have to say, being intimately acquainted with this document for the past year plus, the entire time I've been on the trustees, we've given 12 years of incremental tax relief to town outside the village voters in an effort to really respect the fact that this is going to be hard for them. And I don't know how else we could express the understanding that it's asking a lot. So I guess I would say, please remember that half of your constituents are asking for this. And the other point I'd make is that 3.3, even if we said, sure, yeah, the Gov Sub could come back and say that, starting in March, the Select Board will start transitioning to a 3.3 board. That has zero bearing on a new charter document. None whatsoever. We had, as far as I'm concerned, being on the Gov Sub and committee, tentative tacit approval to the plans up until that charter petition was put forward. What the Select Board is made up of up until the vote for the new charter, in my mind, as a town resident, has no bearing on what goes into a new town charter. There was no mention of the new town or the merger or any of that in the charter petition. It may be desirable for some, but the jury's still out on that, as far as I'm concerned. There's been no vote on the new charter, and I'll just throw that out there as well. And again, not trying to beat on that plan, but I just don't see where that assumption gets from A to B. Even if the governance subcommittee takes your transition plan, takes the letter and says, you know what, fine, you talked about it, it's good, that's your new select board. Well, the new town of Essex hasn't been formed yet. And the new town of Essex's charter hasn't been formed yet. The proposed charter, it's not even, you all haven't really even discussed it yet. So I just put that out there. There's no impetus, there's no requirement that the new charter for the new town have 3.3 in it. None. I agree with some of the comments. I'm not going to lie. I thought we'd have more public input. And I'm going to go out and say I'm struggling with this a little bit. But I'm hearing from an awful lot of the folks that I represent that they need some help quickly. And they're ready, COVID or not, to move forward. There is a lot in the charter document, but I think as everybody that's been working on it knows, ultimately there's not a lot of options. It's pretty basic. There's a few, maybe 4 or 5 things that really need a lot of discussion and a lot of working out. But generally speaking, it's not boilerplate, but it's not anything that needs, I think, months and months of understanding. The village is giving up, is ceding tax relief over 12 years. If this waits a year, I would argue we rewrite it to make that 11, because the whole point of 12 was to coincide with the retirement of the village's bonded debt. So the longer we wait, for instance, if the governance subcommittee, if we vote in town meeting day, doesn't have time next year to take it up, I don't know what we do, because the village would be giving, it puts us in a very odd position. So, it's another argument to sort of move forward if we can. If it's going to be a negotiation, then I would argue that all of that is on the table through the holidays. All of that phase in, every bit of it would be on the table again. And again, not trying to be aggressive. That is not an aggressive comment. I'm just saying the longer this takes, the shorter that period would be. So the more difficult the absorption would be. I'll leave it there. I think I really am looking forward to hearing what the select board thinks of what we've done. And I hear your hesitation and understand it.
George, I see that you have a hand up.
Yep. So I'll first off, I'll start by saying, Andy, I don't know the exact wording you want in 307B. I have it up on my other PC, and I'll at some point get exactly what wording you want in there, and I guarantee I'll put it in. And not that I have control over everything, but I'm the one who's doing the editing of the charter. In terms of 3.3 and other issues, I think what you're hearing from the trustees is that we're flexible on it, and I'd say we're also flexible on if we put a charter out to vote just for the village, amending that very same charter and putting it out for a vote for the village again at annual meeting. Yes, it's a little confusing. Yes, it's a little expensive, but compared to the general confusion and expense that's going on out there, I think it's pretty small potatoes. But I want to say two things here. Back a few years ago, and Elaine, you know this well, we tried to consolidate the recreation departments. And what did we do? We had a big plan. We had it really well thought out. We hired facilitators, and they went around. We had a group of dedicated volunteers, some staff, some board members that went around with the facilitator, and they held these meetings at middle schools and elementary schools around the village and the town. And I listened to them. I went to a few of them, and some of them went okay. Most of them, they were called liars. They were criticized. The facts that they put up that were plainly available in annual reports were called deceptive. I saw one person threaten to have them prosecuted. And then the entire enterprise was voted down soundly by the folks in the town outside the village. And it was approved by the village. I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen here, but let's not kid ourselves what's going to happen here, no matter what we do, and no matter what kind of a communication plan we have, COVID or no. It doesn't matter what we do. My point is not that it's automatically going to be defeated in the town, but let's understand how these things work. Let's learn from past history that that we can put all of our resources into it, communicating with the public, and it could still be defeated. Okay? We have to be realistic about that. We can't let our enthusiasm and our emotion blind us to these facts. And so my point is that in March, high likelihood, let's toss a coin. Heads, it gets passed. Tails, it gets defeated. We have no idea. If it's tails, the depression and despair, honestly, really, the dark feelings that causes in the village, I do not, as an elected official in this community, I do not want to see that happen again. I'm so damn determined to not see that happen again. And so I want to have a plan that when that happens, we can roll out that plan and say, here's where we're going. Okay? I want to say one other point. I got an earful this past weekend at our open and outside event, and some of you came. I was told, why is the village giving up so much? Why are we making so many sacrifices? I had two people ask me, why isn't the town going to pay us tens of millions of dollars for all the public infrastructure they'll be acquiring? You know, we built all this infrastructure ourselves. We helped build it in the town, but we built all the village infrastructure ourselves. We're handing this over to the town. Why aren't they paying us for that? So I didn't even have a good comeback for that. So we could put this charter on the ballot in November, and it could very likely be defeated. We're assuming that the village is just going to roll over and say, great, but it could be defeated in the village. So I'm anxious to have a conversation with the people in the village, okay? I'm anxious to have that conversation. And putting the charter, I keep getting them confused, putting the charter on the ballot in November allows us to begin that conversation. And I'm not saying that it's necessarily going to lead us to some kind of separation initiative. You know, other people have come up with other ideas. But I absolutely don't want the animosity, any animosity between our boards. For God's sake, I've been at this since 2014, trying to bring the boards together. The last thing in the world I want to see. But, you know, we have to be realistic that no matter what we do, no matter how hard we try, no matter what kind of positive attitude we send out there, it could still be defeated. It's not under our control. And if that happens, I want the village to have a good backup plan. Okay? And we can't be working on merger and be working on a backup plan at the same time. Thank you.
Andrew, are your board members done with responses?
I don't see any other hands up. I would take that as an I assume yes.
Go ahead, Vince.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on Raja's point about thinking about the village as our constituents as well, and I do. And part of my motivation for wanting to slow down was to try to give the village residents that do want merger what they want, like a successful merger. So I totally understand where you're coming from, and I think that there's probably room in the middle here. Can we pull this off? Can we pull the charter off without representation language? Can we just say something like it will adopt the representation style of the previous charter? And that way we can settle 3+3 outside of the merger process. That's a no?
No.
Okay. All right.
Good try, though.
Well, what are you going to do? So yeah, that's kind of all I really had, though. But yeah, I appreciate the urgency.
Pat?
Raj, I appreciate the point as well that you mentioned about my speaking about TOV is in particular not to discount the village residents, of which I am one, but rather that's a particular group of voters that have been, very vocal and have reached out in particular saying, this is what we need to have resolved before we could even consider merger. I just have not had similar feedback from villagers. So it was not to discount half of the constituency, as it were. But I'll try to watch my language in the future, because you're right. It probably came off as maybe more flip than I intended it. I do think that there's still so much communication that needs to be done. And, I think, I'm not sure how many of you know, but I generally, when it comes to any sort of town business, I avoid social media. I try not to make my points on there, because I feel that the negatives by far outweigh the positives. But what I have seen over the last several days is a massive misunderstanding of how taxes work from people who I thought really honestly probably would know better. People who I think have come to our meetings for a long time and still just completely misidentify how the taxes are distributed, or collected in this town and where they're spent. And I don't think that has anything necessarily to do with this merger document, but because it seems like such a point of contention, and especially with the numbers we're potentially expecting to get on the 28th, which could dramatically change how people are going to feel about the merger or not. I'm wondering if it might not be in our best interest to put together some sort of, I'm thinking of like a video that the school board did at one point, like a 5-minute, this is how taxes actually work. I don't know, have we done this before? And it's, something that we can dig up and share a little bit, and maybe include some of the educational taxes in there, because I saw a lot over the last couple of days about how the educational taxes make up a huge chunk, but I saw almost nothing about how the people who are paying those education taxes probably don't pay that full rate. Most of them are paying with income sensitivity, so they're not actually paying what's on their tax bill, and they have no idea that that's the case. Because it happens in their taxes that they file at the end of the year. So they're just not aware that they're getting credit back. And it's just, I think it's something that is just such a widespread misunderstanding in this town, that the people who want to shout down any side of this issue play off of that fundamental lack of misunderstanding. They say, well, it's the villagers that are going to make the tax bill high when we merge, and it's because they've invested so much in their pool over the years. So if we merge, they're going to have to. I know, George, I can see you rolling your head, but again, like, that's just, it's out there, and trying to rein it in is, I think, kind of like what I would like to see happen. If we could produce something or create something that is hopefully easy and is explanatory, I know taxes aren't easy. I get it. Like, I've been on these boards, and it's a slog. I had to answer questions for Sarah because the school thing is a mess. It's difficult. But if we could do that and we could point people to that video or to that document and say, listen, I know what you've heard. It's not because the village has built pools. It's because 42% of the taxes are being spent in places that, don't impact the village itself. I mean, whatever we need to do. I mean, I just think that it's a misunderstanding that until it gets cleared up, we may just continually see failed merger votes. And I don't think that it's been addressed for years because I guess I don't really know. Maybe I haven't lived in the community long enough to know. I'm sure that efforts have absolutely been put out for it, but it's still there. It still exists in widespread amounts.
Definitely a need for education, regardless of what we do. I see Evan's hand is up. I'd like to suggest if we could begin to transition, take the thoughts that we've heard from everybody and hold them while we continue our conversation and we move on to the charter itself. Dan Richardson has joined us, and so we want to avail ourselves of his expertise while he's able. And so, Evan, why don't you go ahead and then we'll dive in.
Thank you. I'm going to be very brief. The task that was given to Sarah Macy, our finance director, for September is the cost of separation. The cost of merger is known. It is between $26 and $30 on an average $280,000 home. That has not changed. The only thing that changes is if, actually, I don't even want to go past that. That's what's known. That's the range we're talking about over 12 years, $26 to $30. That's if nothing else changes in the financing of the joint community. What Sarah's working on is the cost of separation. That's what was asked of her, which is different than merger because it has other things that has to be put in there and separated out based upon what is being shared right now. So just want that to be known. Dan, I'm glad you've joined us. And you guys made an 8:30 check-in time to see how you're doing. So
some of it's good.
Have at it.
Quick point of clarity there. That's 26 to 30 compounded year over year for 12. I just want to make sure the listeners at home know that it'll be added every year again.
That is correct.
It's not just the 20s just come up before. Just want to be clear. Thank you.
Yep.
So thank you, Evan, for reminding us that we have a check-in in about 50 minutes. Select board members have all expressed a concern with the representation model that is in the charter that was completed by the trustees. I'd like to suggest that we start our conversation with that because it's the most important topic. It's the elephant in the room, and I'd like to see if we can't complete that. And it may take longer, and I would rather not tackle all the little stuff and then still not have talked about that with the board's permission, of course. Would that be okay with the select board? Okay. Trustees, if that's something you'd like to do?
Good with me.
Okay.
Seems like it's good.
Okay. So I'd like to ask select board members to talk specifically about the representation model and where you are on it. And I heard some interesting interpretation from some of the trustees about the possibility of leaving 331 in their charter and then voting on it again. So I'd like that to come into this conversation as well. So is there a select board member who would like to talk about this first? Andy?
Since it's a hill I'm willing to die on, I guess I should lead the charge. So, I've brought up the concept of what I've heard from people outside the village is that in order for them to to support this, the village needs to give something up. And what I'd like to ask the village to give up is non-support of 3+3. So if we put 3+3 in there, I'm much more willing to go forward with this. 61% of my constituents voted for it. We've had this, people have mentioned the 50% of the constituents live in the village, 50% live outside, and you're ignoring the part, maybe you're, some concern about not taking everybody's position into account, but 61%, which is more than 50%, voted in favor of it. And so, unless it has 3+3 in it, I'm not going to support it.
Andy, if I have this correct, and George, or I forget which trustee said this, but correct me if I'm wrong. If the trustees go forth with, never mind. I need to pull that back.
Finish your thought. What is it?
No, it's not fully formed. I need to start over. Please continue. Or Raj has his hand up and Pat has his hand up. Raj, can the select board make some comments? Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Pat.
So 3+3, I'd prefer to have in there at least until we hear from government ops. I don't like 3+3. I respect the will of the voters in the community, but I think that there's a fundamental flaw in setting something up for ties. The school board analogy that's been used is flawed for reasons that I've mentioned repeatedly through multiple meetings. I don't really feel the need to go into those again. But once or if House Gov gives us up or down, then I feel like we can move forward with this. That's one of my biggest uncomfortabilities about November, is that we're not going to have the answer to that. I understand this, and please bear with me. I'm speaking in extreme hyperbole, but if the people of a town vote to say that pickpocketing is suddenly okay, it doesn't mean that it can pass even if it gets 60% of support for the town. If it's fundamentally a problem, then it's not going to get changed in the legislature. And that's really what they're working on now. And they've at least given to us in a letter saying that this is a problem. So no, I'm not saying 3+3 is illegal. What I'm saying is that if the town does, in its majority, agree to put something in its charter and then send it up, it still has to pass that test of whether or not it's going to get applied through the legislature. And I mean, it doesn't seem like it, but until we've got that yes or no, I mean, I have a really tough time saying that we can put anything else in there because it has already passed. We need to wait and get that answer.
Dawn?
Muted, Don.
Don, you're muted.
I think this thing doesn't like me. So this may be a question for Dan, and it may be somebody else can answer it. If the village goes ahead and puts their merger vote on their ballot in November, and the village passes it and accepts the new charter as the trustees have prepared, and it passes, can they go back in and change it? Because they were saying there, if they take the 3-3 part out, but I'm concerned they won't be able to go back in and fix that charter because they just voted on it.
So, do you mean the trustees going back? I mean, the village going back and voting on it?
Right. If the village votes to approve this new charter and approve the merger on their half, okay, they like what they see and they support it and they approve it, is there any going back to change it at that point? Because they've already approved it as presented.
And so the other half of that question is if the town does not go forward, right? So if the village goes forward independently and they approve it and we don't have it on our ballot, what's the situation?
Right.
Well, I can handle Andy's question first because I think it's much more simple and straightforward, which is it doesn't go anywhere. You know, if you have a merger and only one, you know, it's like a wedding. If only the groom shows up, it's called off, no matter how eager the groom is. But you know, if as far as going back and changing things, in theory, that's a possibility. It may also be something where if it is a minor change, it could be something proposed to the government ops committee, or if there's, you know, because you have to think of it in different stages. So there's the stage that we are at right now where the legislative bodies for the two municipalities are debating this and talking about its issues. Then at the next level, it's where the voters are given provisions to approve. And then the third stage is really the legislative approval, where it effectively becomes, you know, a official charter provision, so that it carries the burden, the weight of law. And at each level, you know, obviously the voters really only have a yes or no proposition, but at the beginning with the legislative bodies, both the local and then the state, there is room to make adjustments to that. If it was something major and if there was a concern that it wasn't necessarily supported by the popular vote, so say, for example, in one version, there's a police department, and in another version, there's not a police department, that would be something where I would definitely recommend you go back to the voters. And I would suspect that the legislature would not feel comfortable making such a drastic change without the input of the voters. But if you're talking about changing, for example, if you have the sidewalk district, if there's a provision and a language in there that somebody says, well, you know, we'd like the ability to renew the sidewalk district beyond the 12 years, to put that language in there, the legislature might feel comfortable because that would seemingly be a relatively minor change, that they would likely feel comfortable amending it to without necessarily putting it through the whole process again. So that's to say, that's a very sort of shaggy dog way of saying you could revote some of these provisions, but I would be very cautious because of the expense, because of the process going through it. It really is one of those things where you should get it right the first time, as opposed to trying to get it over the finish line and then redoing it in series of iterations, because that can sow confusion for the voters, and that can also create complications where one version gets passed and another doesn't.
Thank you.
Andy, did you have your hand up again, or is that?
Yes, it's up. It's up again. But I think it's related to this particular topic we were just talking about. The question I raised on Monday about the dissolution of the village charter. I know there's been assertions that there has to be 2 votes by the village. One is to dissolve their current charter, and one is to approve the new charter. Is that true, or is that, you know, or can do we just put a phrase in the charter that says approval of this charter dissolves the? Because I just want to make sure there's only the one vote. Yeah.
You can just do it. You can do it by one vote. That would effectively seek to dissolve, but yeah, it would be conditional, obviously.
Right.
You know, conditioned upon approval of the new charter and merger. The old charter and village entity would dissolve.
Okay. Okay. So just want to make clear that those are not 2 separate votes. You can have it all in one vote. Great. Thanks.
Right, and we have that in the charter.
Yep.
Already. Vince or Pat, did you have anything further? Because Raj has been waiting a long time.
No, I
Nope, I'm all
said
set.
all my stuff.
Okay. Thanks for waiting, Raj. There you go. Oh.
Mute it again. You'll get there.
What I've done, Raj, is I've added Teams to my desktop computer because the laptop
this
just
is my works.
had a
My
problem.
Dell from the village is not working. Select board members. Andy, I get what you're saying about 3-3. Again, I'll reiterate, there was nothing about that vote that meant it had to go on into the new community. You did bring up seems like the perennial question of, you hear people say, what is the village willing to give up? Well, we're not going to give up the 3-3. I'll remind you that a little while ago, we talked about phasing in our municipal budget for 12 years. That means tax relief for village residents is spread out in tiny little increments, just like the increases are for the town over 12 years. We have to keep capital. We're paying capital right now, capital money to the town outside the village for no return. We're going to keep paying for our capital projects according to this draft. We're paying for our sidewalks. You'd think that the new town would appreciate the fact that it has a downtown center that requires some different sidewalk maintenance and winter plowing than the rest of the town outside the village. But to make sure we get those services, we're willing to keep paying for that. All of those things are what the village is willing to give up. I just want to make that clear for people listening at home. The village is giving up an awful lot already by not asking to merge it all in one fell swoop. And I guess I'll say we're not forcing it on the town either. These boards have been working together for years on this. Consolidation for many years and merger for a few. That is the ultimate idea of those consolidations. So I just want to keep bringing that up. I feel like listening to some of this, and I respect your points of view, I do. But we're being asked to do 3-3. We're being asked to do the tax phase-in over 12 years. I don't know that there's anything else to give. What is the town doing? I guess I'll put it that way. What is the town outside the village doing? And I don't mean that, again, it's not meant as an aggressive question. I don't want to beat anybody up. But I am left to wonder a little bit what we're supposed to think.
I see Andrew and Dan, and Andy, you have your hand up, but Andrew's I think he went first.
I was only going to add to Raj's comment about the other things we are giving up are control over the Brownell Library, control over our economic development and our community development, control over our planning commission, control over our recreation department. We are also giving up control of the assets that we have spent on our community, giving up control of the wastewater treatment plant and all the infrastructure that applies with it. So what we're giving up is control of the destiny, control of the downtown, control of our community. That's what we're giving up.
Andy?
I want to respond to what Raj said about capital not being spent or being spent completely outside of the village. That's not true at all. The 2-cent tax that's collected in FY21, if you look at the 5-year plan, 39% of it gets spent on shared projects. With regard to expends, it gets dedicated to shared projects. It doesn't all get spent this year, but from the standpoint of what gets spent in FY 21, it's 29.4% of the expenditures are for shared projects. Also, I guess with regard to, I've heard it said earlier, just want to get this out there too, that, and I understand 42% of the grand list is in the village. But if you look at the town budget, this is based on this, past budget season. I asked every department head whether they were a shared service or whether they were town outside the village only, and add the numbers up, and it's 77% of the town budget supports shared services. So it's not true that 42% of the money goes and never comes back. 3/4 of it is used for shared services. So, and I'm not taking it personally when I know whenever I say what's the village giving up, I get a lot of response from it, and I appreciate that and I understand that. And let's document that. Let's tell people what it all means. We can rant all we want in this meeting, but I think we need to be able to take the time to have that discussion, and we're not. If we need to approve this this charter tonight. So,
Andy, I would only respond that, of course, I know it's not your personal comment, and you're reflecting back what you hear, and sharing what you're hearing from people. I'm not meaning that that's where you're coming from. I'm not trying to attribute that to you personally. The what's the village giving up comments. So just wanted to make that clear for you.
George?
As far as the can I cut in here, guys? I think we've got Dan here, and we're kind of drifting far afield from the question at hand, which is the 3-3. And I think what I'm hearing, I'll just start by saying I would be dead set against the 3-3 under the present circumstances, because I think it would be essentially the town gerrymandering the village. You would never even dream if if most of the people in the village were a lower poverty level or of a different race than the people outside the town, the town wouldn't even think of doing something like this. But because of the economic disparity, that's a little more complex, and so you can vary that. But under the present circumstances, I would be dead set against 3-3. I think in a merged community where all resources are shared, I wouldn't have, on its face, have a big problem with it. I frankly think it's bewildering why you want to have it, lock yourself into tie votes all the time. But I think the issue here, and I'm not sure Dan can answer it because he's tried before, is we're asking Dan to have a crystal ball and kind of predict what is the GovOps committee likely to do? What are they likely to say? If we put 3-3 into a merger charter and it was passed widely by the village and the town and goes sailing down to Montpelier, would under those circumstances the GovOps committee still say, no, you need to have a tiebreaker in there? And I know it puts you on the spot, Dan, and I know you can't possibly give but do your best. I mean, I think that's kind of what we're looking for here, guys. Yeah.
Sure. So, if we think about the different options that the GovOps committee has, there's one option is to just simply sign off on it, that the boards have spoken, the people have spoken, this is what they really want, and they will pass it. That's one option. The other option is this is a no-go for the government ops committee and the legislature. So they're going to sink anything that carries the stink of even-numbered boards. And then there's a third option, which is that they may make some adjustment to it. And presumably it will be done in a normal committee fashion, which is, they take testimony, but, there will be an opportunity to sort of have people from the town talk and understand. I can't foresee the committee just simply rubber stamping this. I think they're going to have questions about it because of the reasons I've articulated before, but I'll just simply summarize, which, the even number boards are generally disfavored. It's certainly inconsistent with the standard and default provisions of Vermont statutes, which call for either odd-numbered boards, 3 or 5 or 7, with governing bodies. As I said before, there are really, with a couple exceptions, the school board being one of them, and I know that there's reasons for that, but generally select boards are odd numbered. I can't think of one, and I haven't been able to find one that's been even numbered. Another reason that they have is that, when you have a 6-member board, you no longer have majority, you always have a supermajority, meaning you have to get 4 votes to pass a quorum, which, all of these things are not necessarily like, and I want to be clear, they're not terrible in and of themselves. They're just questions of good governance, and is this the best system? And if they're going to be put into question form to any town that puts forth a 3-3 board. And the other issue is going to be ties. And yes, ties do occur in even odd-numbered boards if somebody recuses themselves or such, but it just, when you have a 6-member board, it makes ties more likely. And it does, create the possibility where you might have a minority if they can, or, it creates another level of sort of gamesmanship that I think the legislature has generally not wanted to let into play. So, those are the general questions that they're going to have, those issues. They're going to say, have you thought about these issues? How does your system address these? Why is your system inconsistent with all other systems? What's the benefit that you see coming out of it? And, like you say, if this is the only point and there's a giant charter revision behind it, I think the legislature would feel compelled to push this, but they may tweak it because it's certainly within their prerogatives. And if they feel that this was just simply not a well thought out system, in their opinion, I have seen them make these type of changes. So I think that's a strong possibility.
Okay. So the strong. So if I get it straight, then if we put 3-3 into the charter, there's a strong possibility it would just get revised in the committee room, and then but basically, and what I guess what I'm getting at for the other board members is, and I'm not trying to wheel and deal and negotiate, but if the trustees put in a 3-3 structure into the charter, our version of the charter tonight, how would the select board feel? Would you be then willing to move forward and put it on the ballot in November, or would you still say, yeah, that's great, thank you, but we still need more time? And I'm not trying to do that. I'm not trying to coerce you. I swear to God, I'm not trying to coerce you guys. But I just want to get a sense of how you guys feel about that. What we could do is we could put 3-3-1, leave 3-3-1 in the charter as it is, and make it known that if down the road the select board wants to come up with put a merger charter, pretty much the same thing as we've got, but with a 3-3 board structure in it, and that gets passed in the town, maybe we also pass it in the village, with the understanding that what's basically going to happen is that it's going to get changed to a 3-3-1 structure. But that scenario, that's just a scenario that could play out to get past this impasse. Throw it out there and leave it open for questions.
Andy, you had your hand up, but now it's down. Oh, it's back. Go ahead.
Yes. So I heard Dan's comments differently, and so maybe it's a good thing he's here. He can clarify, because I thought he said that if 3+3 is in there's a stronger chance that it would be approved by the GovOps, not that if it's in there's a strong chance it would be modified. So I heard it completely differently.
Again, as George suggested, I'm looking into a crystal ball. So it comes with that caveat that I'm not, in any way suggesting I know because first of all, we don't know what the government ops committee is who's going to be on it come January. There's an election, there's a changeover, maybe a new chair, or maybe the same cast of characters. What I would frame it this way, which is you're going to get a lot of questions from the government ops committee if you put in 3-3. And they're going to say, why did you do it? Have you thought about these issues? How you're going to deal with the tie because of the even numbered structure? And are you concerned that, the idea that you will have to have a supermajority for every piece of legislation? The answers to that, if I was, defending it, would include you'd want to have data to show, the number of consensus decisions that and not just the individual select board and trustees have made, because those have been largely independent. But when the boards have come together, how close to consensus have you come on key issues as a predictor of what it's going to look like for future disputes? And what is the value of consensus lawmaking? Because that's, in a lot of ways, when you have a 3-3 board, you're pretty much forcing yourself into consensus lawmaking, because there will be no bare majorities. It will be you either get 4 votes or it doesn't. The motions or action items do not pass. That in looking for is there a short way to do a tiebreaker? There really isn't a good way of doing a tiebreaker short of having a chair or mayor or some person who can act as a tiebreaker, an elected official of that sort. So what you're going to get from the government ops are questions. And if you make a compelling case and you say, this is really important to us, that's how you would get 3-3 past the government ops committee. Short of that, I could see the government ops committee saying, we're just not comfortable with this. The only way we're going to approve this is if we amend this. And it won't be something where they'll simply, I think it's also safe to say that wouldn't be something where they would just simply say, we're amending it, we're changing it to X, live with it. There would be a committee meeting, there would be an attempt to reach out to the constituency, to the town, to the village, to say, we're not comfortable with this. We need to have a solution to this. This is what we propose. And this is what we're going to propose. But at the end of the day, it is going to be what the government ops committee approves and passes through as legislation. So I think it's an issue. It's an uphill issue simply because it is not you're going outside of the norm. But if you're prepared to make a compelling case for it, the legislature, I think ultimately, because this is one small part of several big, intricate wheels and puzzles that they're trying to review and pass, would more likely to simply allow it to pass in that instance if there was a compelling reason that the town and village were able to make in support of it, and explain why they wanted that.
I know there are a lot of people raising hands, but I just want to insert one thing, because here is what I've heard, because I was on the governance subcommittee, how this got started. And here is the reason that would be offered, or the only reason I've heard. We want 3-3. We don't want a single at-large person, because it's easier to get elected in the village than in the town. And therefore, if we had a single at-large person, that's why that seat would most likely always be going to a village person. And that's the only argument, the one that I can think of, and maybe someone else has, but that's the only argument I've heard in favor of this. And I'm going to guess, based on what you're saying, Dan, the committee would probably not accept that as a valid reason for wanting to keep this in. Now, if someone else has had a good reason about why having one single at-large seat is bad. If someone can come up, trustees or selectmen, someone can come up with a reason as to why having one single at-large seat is a bad thing, other than it would just automatically go to the village, which is certainly fantasy, of course. I'd like to hear it. And I think if we can't come up with something, then I think we're facing a stark reality here, guys. We can still put it in there, but understand, and I think we got to be honest, you can still put it in there, but it's probably not going to fly. I'll stop. Sorry. Other people want to talk.
So I have a question for Dan. Again, if you can utilize your crystal ball. I'm curious if there have been other, I'm going to use that marriage analogy, if there have been other charter proposals that have been given to the legislature where you have one part of a community that overwhelmingly votes for it, another part of the community who was asked to be a part of this but did not vote for that same provision. Does that in turn end up being like the forced marriage where it doesn't matter that this other party voted against the proposal because this number outweighed it, that ends up passing and moving forward? And I would ask whoever has just joined with a phone number ending in 2647, could you please mute yourself? There's a lot of feedback coming through right now. Thank you. So is it like the forced marriage where even if one party doesn't want to be a part of that charter proposal, that because that other number outweighed it by so much that it doesn't matter?
Well, no. I mean, the legislature has been, and I think the history even here in Essex has been that they're unwilling to necessarily forcibly join municipalities. I mean, at the end of the day, the answer to your question is, legally speaking, yes. Because municipalities are creatures of the legislature. So if the legislature decides to merge the village and the town, they can do it. If the legislature decides to take up two inconsistent merger plans and say, we're going to make it into our merger plan, which is a third different type of merger plan, legally speaking, they could. Practically speaking, I'm not aware of the legislature doing that in modern times. They have generally sought to have the municipalities work out the details and come to them with a unified plan that they then scrutinize and review.
So Dan, thank you, and I asked that with this specific example of the 3 and 3, where yes, it passed overwhelmingly in the town outside the village. Inside the village, it did not pass. And so, as the statement has been made before about representing the constituency, that's something that I understand select board members having a hard time with. I would hope you could then see us having a hard time getting over the fact that the village didn't vote for it.
I mean, that raises an issue and a question of, if the village passed a merger that had, everything the same as the town, except the town had 3 and 3 and the village had 3, 3 and 1. And it went to the legislature, I think there would be a strong argument for the legislature to break the deadlock. And it would be, it would be a bit of both municipalities saying, we want to merge and we wish that the legislature would express their Solomonic wisdom and cut the Gordian knot, as it were.
So I think that may then go to Vince's earlier point. I think this is going to be a deadlock. Would the boards be willing? Could we just move on from the 3 and 3, and could we get to the other stuff? Yeah. See if we can come to agreement on everything else. And then in Andrew's utopia, as I like to live in, could we just have those agreed charters go out to vote?
Select board, how do you feel about that? Dawn, I see you. Can you make a comment?
The 3-3 is only one of the things that we can't agree on, and until we can agree on all of it, I'm not ready to put it to vote.
But if we put a pin in 3-3 for now, continue discussing, come to agreement, and 3-3 is the one thing left standing. How do you feel about that?
I have to support the wish of the voters here in the town, and they want 3-3. That's my job. Right. That's my job as a representative of the town to the select board. So,
right. I think what's being said at this point, though, is assuming all other things are agreed to, and the village puts 3-3-1 in their charter, and we put 3-3 in the town charter and put them to a vote, and they both go to the legislature, and the legislature makes a determination, are you okay with that path? That's I think the question we're, okay.
I'm good with that.
Okay, Andy, your hand is up.
We still don't have the public input or public comment part that, was so critical in our planning and we, agreed that was an important part. So, so no, I don't think I am.
Okay. Vince or Pat?
I am fine leaving 3+3 as written in the town version of the charter and going forward.
Pat?
Well, I definitely think we should continue going. I think it would be really odd, especially for villagers who are going to get, if we put it out to a ballot vote, would then get 2 questions, one of which saying, will you accept a charter that has 3-3-1? And another question that says, will you accept a charter that has 3-3? And I'm not sure that I feel comfortable explaining that to people, to be frank. I mean, I know that I could, but can I do it in an elevator speech? Absolutely not.
Okay, let's put a pin in that. Let's talk about the other items because there are not that many left. But we did say at 8:30 we would take a pause. Sounds like, Raj, can I just say one thing and then it sounds like we're at a bit of a stalemate with 3-3, but we want to continue talking, which is excellent. And then we said we would have public input. So if the boards are okay with that, Raj, do you want to say what you need to say and then we'll open it up?
Well, it depends on if we're going to keep going. I don't know. When I was struggling to get on the meeting, if the trustees discussed the 8:30 break, I know the select board did the other night in their meeting, but that was sort of news to me. But if we're going to keep talking after the 8:30 mark, yeah, I'll wait.
Elaine, could I, before we go to public, could I briefly ask 2 points here?
Absolutely.
That'd be okay. There's one controversy here, which the select board could solve very quickly. The trustees do not care very much about. It's section 601. I had asked Dan to look at it. It has to do with adoption of ordinances. The town charter has a very long, drawn-out process. It's a wonderful process, but it's highly detailed. The village adoption of ordinances says just refer to state statutes. The staff has said we like the village's way of doing it, but in deference to the select board, if you have some deep spiritual connection to this section of the town charter, we don't want to certainly violate that. So we're kind of leaving it up to you, which method you prefer. And if that would be one thing we could deal with very quickly. And then I had asked Dan to also, Raj had asked we put in in sort of the powers of the select board, a fairly detailed piece about regulating tobacco and cannabis products. We didn't know anything about it, and Raj got it from the St. Johnsbury Charter, and so we just put it in whole cloth right into the powers of the and that's something the select board you guys haven't seen. I'm going to guess it doesn't give you great offense because it just gives you an authority that you can choose to use or not use, so it's not really a bad thing. But I would just wonder if Dan could weigh in quickly on those 2 points, and then maybe getting those 2 things out of the way would be a big piece of decision making that would help at least us. Maybe not you got the select board, but would help us. So I'll defer to Dan or someone.
I understand what you're saying, and with respect, we don't even know what that statute about ordinances says.
Oh,
And
you
what-
don't have.
George, we use the ordinance that's in the town, or we use the process that's in the town charter, so we don't know what the statute, and we need a chance to at least read it before we can weigh in on it and agree to it. And I'm grateful that Dan is here and I want to hear what he has to say, but you must understand, we haven't had a chance to even read that statute yet. And the part about cannabis and tobacco, while I understand the impetus behind it, that is a very large topic. The state has not legalized it for sale yet, and there's a zoning approach that might be more applicable than a charter approach. I mean, this is not something we can just go, yeah, we're in for that. I really, as much as I respect all of you, I'm not willing to just sign off without reading that, right? So, Dan, I'd love to hear your opinion so that can help us begin to form what we might think. And then we do need to take a break for the public.
Sure. Well, since I'm standing between everyone in the break, I'll try and be as succinct as possible. So the difference between the way the town adopts ordinances and the way the state statute it is really just one of process. It talks about under the and it's 24 VSA section 1972 talks about the adoption of an ordinance, and it just gives it's basically a 2 hearing process, that you have a first reading and then a second reading, and you have notice that goes along with it, and then the ordinance becomes enacted unless, of course, there's in the next section what's essentially a referendum by petition, where citizens would say, we don't like this ordinance, and they would petition to put it to a public vote. So it's a little bit more streamlined than the way the town has traditionally done it. That's the big difference. It's really one of these things in which it's up to you. You can always, you as a board can always have more process, even if the statute says the statute, in other words, defines a minimum process. But I know, for example, that towns, when they adopt zoning or do zoning revisions, and they do wholesale revisions, they'll have multiple hearings just because they know 2 hearings aren't going to be enough to go through an entire book of zoning. And so they adopt multiple hearings to make sure that the ordinances are publicly vetted and that they understand what they're voting on. So, it's really just a matter of choice and preference. The ordinance provision that the town has is a little bit more elaborate, and that may make sense for certain ordinances. But the only reason I recommended adopting the state is because there's a lot of ordinances where that's not necessary, where you're adopting, no trash burning ordinance, and everybody's worked through it, talked about it, and get it, and then they do the 2 hearings and you can pass it. And it's nicer to have that more efficient process. So I'll leave that there. The tobacco and marijuana regulation. So municipalities aren't normally in the business of regulating those type of things, but because it's a charter provision, of course, it would give you the power to do that. I didn't have an opportunity to look into where St. Johnsbury created theirs from, and so I don't have necessarily a report on that. All I can tell you is that the marijuana regulation field is changing. The state is about to announce its regulatory policy, so what you adopt today may not ultimately reflect how the state goes, and it may fit, and certainly if the town wants to get, if the new municipality wants to get into the business, this might be sort of the toehold that puts it out there. If foresee in the future some benefit from either regulatory and or fees and permit regulation for the town. So it's certainly something you can, the fact that another town has passed it and the legislature has approved it gives you a path. So the legislature has reviewed this; they're familiar with it. And short of there being some information that they did it as a favor to a friend or something like that, I think you have a pretty good. You should feel fairly comfortable that this is something that the legislature is at least comfortable with, whether or not that changes. And it's really then a policy question for you.
I just want to jump in here and clarify something because I'm the one that gave this to George to put in. St. Johnsbury has something about tobacco. This impetus of mine came from a VLCT and CCRPC report, joint report, saying that municipalities, it talked about regulating placement of establishments, the sale, production, growing, all of that stuff. It also talked about advertising in a second section, which we're not getting into. That's way more complicated and much more of a constitutional issue. This report talked about towns that want to have the ability to, let's say, more quickly decide where they want to have placement for stores, production facilities, growing operations for whatever crop, can give themselves the ability to do that. They don't have to do it. They're just basically saying we reserve the right to do it. The cannabis, I believe, came from the report. St. Johnsbury, specifically Wells River, and another community who I can't remember, specifically lay out tobacco, some alcohol as well, which I did not include. So part of the language comes from St. Johnsbury, part of it comes from the report. The definitions come from a third source. So I just want to be very clear. St. Johnsbury did not have the full text in their charter that you will see in this.
Okay.
And I'm not even sure, and I was hoping Dan could advise us later on how much of those definitions really need to be in there. And so, that I just wanted to be clear about where it all came from and make sure we're all on the same page about that. And Elaine, I hear you when you say we haven't seen it yet. So, get it. I just don't want any misunderstandings about sourcing.
Right.
I appreciate that, Raj, and I know that public health is your mission in life, and that's a very important aspect of this charter that we'll consider. Dan, we're going to go to public comment, but I know there's still questions about ordinances. I think Dawn had some, so I don't know if you want to stick around or Evan could text you when we're done with the public comment. I'm not sure how you want to do that, but there's still a little bit about ordinances we probably want to talk about.
Sure. Probably what makes the most sense for everyone is I'm happy to jump off, and I'll have my cell phone with me. So if Evan wants to text me when you need me again, I will be here.
Okay. I'm sorry to jump in, Lena. I know you're desperate to get to the audience, but before Dan departs, I think we have a technical question that would be great in the event that we can't get back to you, Dan. We're under the assumption, and Susan, I think, is still here, that if we want to put a merger charter on the ballot in November, it has to be in Susan's hands by tomorrow. Is that correct, or do we have more time?
Well, I believe you have, there has to be a sort of 60-day window. What you'd have to do is you'd have to agree to merge, and there would have to be a general plan of merger. Now, I think you would be able to modify that after the deadline that it gets onto the ballot, because the actual language itself doesn't go onto the ballot, but is attached. And so I think you would have that sort of 60-day window that they talk about in the statute. And so you're really talking about September 3rd that you'd have to have everything finalized.
Okay, great.
Can I interrupt? I think she has to have it to the printers before that. That's why she wanted it by tomorrow.
Is Susan still here? Okay.
So, Dan, what you're saying is the language on the ballot, which would be a single question, should be is going to go off to the printer, and that should be approved. But the language of the charter that is the subject of the question, we have until September 3rd to really refine the language.
Right.
Okay.
And so, Dan, could we call you or get in touch with you? We can't if just the trustees only move ahead and decide to put the question. we would need you to give us the appropriate language that would be in that phraseology for the question that would be that we would give to Susan tomorrow. So if we can't get back, if we can't for some reason reach you, will we be able to get to you tomorrow so we can? That doesn't sound like a big task. It sounds like we could probably get that done pretty quickly.
Yes, is
Okay.
the answer to both questions.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so Pat has had his hand up. Evan has his hand up. Can you please make it quick? Because we did promise the public we would do public comment.
Mine's procedural.
Patrick, you're muted.
Mine's an ordinance question, so I'll catch Dan when he comes back with it rather than wait.
Thank you. Evan?
Mine's procedural. In talking with Dan and Susan, you can put the language on a ballot for the ballot and make the deadline. The charter merger statute is pretty clear, right, Dan? Shall the town or village merge, blah, 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 right? It's pretty standard boilerplate language.
Yes.
The statute also requires a plan of merger. That needs to be available by a certain date for the public to view, or you can run afoul of some procedures and be open to legalities. That about true, Dan?
Yes.
So what you're saying is by September 3rd, that plan of merger has to be published and then cannot change substantively unless there's a glaring, typo or something like that.
We call those Scrivener's errors. Yes, you don't get to remake, and that's a little bit of the answer that I was giving to Don earlier, which is, you're really once you pass that deadline, if you make changes, you're essentially starting a new process. Essentially a charter provision on a charter that hasn't been passed yet.
So
That's
does
very
that
helpful
make sense?
distinction.
Does that make sense to everybody?
Yep.
Question goes on the ballot, but the document that is behind that question on the ballot can be built in the next week or two, but it does have to be done and approved by the two boards in its final form as plan of merger by September 3rd. No later than September 3rd. And I would suggest slightly earlier. Correct, Dan? You're muted.
Yes.
Good, because that's what we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
So I'm glad I learned something.
You did.
Thank you. Ms. Haney, please take us to break.
Okay, and many thanks to the public who have been watching and waiting. At this time, if you wish to speak, you should raise your hand or indicate in the chat, and otherwise keep your mics muted. Tracy Delphia has been requesting a moment to speak since about 5 to 8, so she's going to go first. And then I see Margaret Smith. So Tracy and then Margaret. I see Patty waving. Patty can be number 3.
Thanks. So for those who don't know me, I come from a land of zoning and bylaws and things that are heavily dependent on unintended consequences. So from what I'm hearing is that the select board needs to make a decision on whether to put a question on the ballot without knowing what that actual plan is and being under a very tight time frame for getting that plan together. We've had, I think, 2 issues tonight brought up that hadn't even been discussed or seen, which is ripe for those unintended consequences to peek their heads up. And I'm quite frankly not willing to take that risk. My other comment is around the merged charter and the representation model. I think I'm correct when I say that the merged charter is supposed to represent all of Essex. together, a unified community. And in that spirit, I would hope that both boards would respect the full town-wide vote on the representation model of 3+3. I can't count the number of times tonight that I've heard town inside the village, town outside the village. As long as there is an odd person out, I'm not going to say man, an odd person out, you leave yourselves open to that finger pointing of, oh, well, it's the village. Oh, it's the town. The only way that we as a community are going to move past this is to have completely equal representation. The voters spoke in March, and I am extremely concerned, and I feel it's very disingenuous for anyone to say that, oh, well, that vote was only in relation to the current charter. That to me feels like a bait and switch to say, oh, well, we'll move forward with that for the town as it is right now. But when we go forward with a merged charter, we're just going to completely disregard the will of those voters who clearly spoke in favor of 3+3, and we're going to do our own thing. So I have major concerns with that approach. I do have other comments, but due to the hour and I assume the number of people who wish to speak, I will end it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. I appreciate your keeping to the time limit. If you have additional comments, you are more than welcome to send them to both boards. Margaret.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Okay. I have a question. I was getting the impression that the Junction might put out a version of the charter that included a 3+3+1, and the town might put out a version of the charter that said 3+3. And my question is, do the folks in the village get to vote on both of those? Do they get 2 votes? And if so, that just somehow just doesn't quite seem fair. And I think that's been an ongoing issue for folks outside the village, that they're getting railroaded by the village folks getting double the number of votes. So am I confused, or is that the way it works?
Margaret, we're trying to limit it to just comments and not conversation. I'm just going to answer it and say the village residents get to vote twice because they live in 2 municipalities. They live in the town and they live in the village.
Okay, still doesn't seem fair.
They're 2 separate questions, though. Yeah.
Right, 2 separate questions. Patty.
Oh, yes. My only question is, I need to see data. I know that your Sarah Macy is working really hard for all of the town and the village. I guess she does all our finances. And I want to see 2 sheets of paper, everything broken down. I mean, not like the booklet when you go to town meeting, but just, I got to see numbers. I need to see numbers. And then equal representation to me is just simple math, because we have an equal population in both sides of town, but that doesn't mean we have to just have a boundary of outside the village and the Junction. Maybe we could do 3 wards. Maybe we can be flexible, but let's see some numbers. I mean, if you guys are crunching, trying to get everything done to the printer tomorrow, why don't we have numbers given out to the public? Like, just put it online. We can all look at it tonight and just see. I want to see basically, if we were to separate, what would it cost if we merge? The tax shift thing is a bait and switch to me, because I want 3+3 before a tax shift. People in the village want the tax shift, then the 3+3. So that's why we're at an impasse. Let's see some numbers, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. Lorraine Zaloom is on the phone, so go ahead, Lorraine.
Hi, Elaine. Sorry about that. Just a couple of comments. George had remarked that, if I'm understanding correctly, that the 3+3 would be gerrymandering, if I caught that correctly. I'm a little confused by that because my understanding from watching the trustees meeting the other night was that the charter, in their charter proposal, is 3+3+1, and that the 3 would be from the TIV and there would be 3 from the TOV. So is that gerrymandering then? Because that's along the same lines. And then the other comment that I have is I saw there was some broad discussion on a community group about the village not getting any projects done, even though they're paying for the capital budget. There's no village projects, if I'm understanding that correctly. And I just don't understand that. So I just would like some elaboration on that, because hearing what Andy said tonight, hearing what Raj said, I'm confused as I look through the capital budget line by line, where it says things like the highway garage area improvement, the library, the memorial hall, energy-saving projects, historic water tower, slate roof, blah, 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 tree farm, the radio base, all those kind of things that are line by line, including fire department vehicles, capital park vehicles, the senior vans. I thought a lot of those were shared. The Indian Brook Dam repair, I thought these were things that we all shared. So is the village paying twice? Like, are they taxed twice for capital, for the capital budget? Because if they are, certainly I could understand why they would be upset. But if that could be clarified as well. And thank you guys for your time tonight.
Thanks, Lorraine. We will try to clarify that. It's a pretty complicated situation.
Yes, it definitely is.
Long story short, you're on the right track. So.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else wish to speak? Please raise your hand or make a comment in the chat.
Chair Haney, this is Brian Sheldon on the phone, if there's no one else in the queue.
Go right ahead, Brian, and then after you will be Annie Cooper.
Hi, Chair Haney, President Brown. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I had a question about severability. It seems that I didn't know if parts of but in particular, likely the governance plans, which seem to be at odds between the village and the town, could be removed either by a court or by government ops as if this were passed by the voters. Because I'm concerned about that because I'm not convinced that government ops would accept 3-3 with an even-numbered board, nor would the courts. So I'll take my answer offline. Thank you.
We might have to wait and answer that when Dan gets back, because I'm not sure. We do have a separability clause in the charter, but I don't know how to answer that. So we'll take the comment and we'll move on. Go ahead, Annie.
Hi, good evening, Chair Haney and President Brown. I have two questions. First, please. One question is, I cannot recall the first day that we learned that there was in existence a citizen-led charter change. Can anyone remind me of that date?
You mean the 3-3 charter change?
My bad. The 3-3 charter change. What was the first date we heard of that in the public? Can you guess?
Don't know. December 17th or something like that. But somebody knocked on my door, and so many people in the community knew about it.
Oh, and Andy, I appreciate you telling me that. I think you misunderstood my intention, and I appreciate your answer. Thank you very much. So that question has been answered for me in a way that makes me not have to ask my second question about that. I feel very happy that both boards are so engaged, and I'm so grateful for the time you're putting in. And Dawn, thank you so much for showing up to a seat I vacated. And thank you all, the Select Board, for allowing me this space in your hearts and your interaction to still be present at this conversation. And I'm sorry for needing to take my space, and I'm really grateful. What I'm feeling good about is the comfortability of the conversation. And there were two moments this evening where I felt that there was an energy that could really go towards November. And I ask that you take a minute in your heart, each of you and check in with that, regardless of where you come out. I just want you to check back in with yourself one more time in case it can go that way. And just thank you so much for your time and your efforts.
Thanks, Annie. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak? You can raise your hand or indicate in the chat. I see Irene.
Yes, thank you. A couple of comments, if I may. The first would be, I'm concerned about voters getting confused. After every vote, we hear how confusing it was for certain voters who didn't seem to know what they were voting on. If they are voting on a question in the village that says, would you like to approve this merger charter? But the charter is not anywhere on the ballot, and it has different clauses in it for representation and other things. And they are also handed a town ballot that has a question that says, would you like to pass this merger charter? And that ties to a different merger charter with different provisions in it for representation, for example. I think we're opening up a can of worms, so I would just caution the boards not to offer up two ballot questions that look very similar, but indeed point to different charters. Second of all, I heard earlier a question as to what does the town give up? Every time the town is asked by the village to talk about merger, the town gives up hundreds of thousands of dollars to attorneys and consulting firms and surveys and other expenses like staff who work thousands of hours on putting together merger plans. It is a huge expense. Other towns nearby are working on other things. They're going forward with climate change plans, policing plans, ways to combat racism, and yet Essex spends an inordinate amount of time spending money and time on merger. So that is something that the town gives up. Finally, on July 28th, there was a whole list of things that select board members were asking to be prioritized when talking about the merger plan. Beginning at line 64, Ms. Haney said she would like the boards to review each incomplete section of the charter together. That has not happened. Mr. Tyler suggested a planning summit to hear ideas from planning commissioners about their ideas for planning and zoning decisions. That has not happened. Ms. Hill-Fleury suggested that policies and ordinances be reviewed to determine alignment. That has not happened. And so on. I would beg you, do not rush this. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else who wants to speak? Okay, I don't see any other hands. So at this time, we're going to bring the conversation back to the boards. And Andrew, how would you like to proceed with the remainder of the charter?
Well, I think we can either go portion by portion. One thing I want to clear up, Elaine, when you were saying before about the ordinances, I want to make sure my understanding was correct. My impression from that was you wanted more time than tonight to come to a decision on Raj's proposal around regulation of cigarettes, tobacco, and you wanted more time on ordinances before you can make a decision tonight. That was what I took away from that. Is that still true?
Yes, among other things.
So if there are things that we need to know before we can move forward, my question is, how much time are we going to spend tonight trying to come to consensus on something if ultimately tonight we're not going to? Even if it's more than just 3 and 3.
So I asked the board before this meeting if there were high priorities that, as Andy said, they were willing to die on a hill for. And we identified the 3-3 conversation. We identified alignment of ordinances, not the process for doing the ordinances, which we discussed before the break, but actually addressing duplicative and conflicting ordinances between the village and the town. That's something we're concerned about. How are we going to handle it? I recall at at your meeting on Monday when you guys worked on the charter, I thought I heard conversation and some language about addressing how the two boards would come together on that and how the interim transitional board would handle it. I don't see it in the new charter. So there's no mechanism in there to address it. And I thought I had heard that. So that's what I meant when I said to Dan, could you stick around? Because I would like to hear from him what the recommendation is for how two merging communities would handle their joining ordinances. And yes, I would like to read the statute of the state for the bare minimum of ordinance process. I think that's important. And for the planning summit, that was on the list. It was of great concern to the trustees, particularly George, that the planning commissions have not talked to us yet. And we should, at the very least, do that, if not have a summit, which implies a big production. But even just a meeting with the planning commissions feels important to me. So, and finally, the public input. I have to be honest and tell you, I feel like I'm in a corner. And these are four things that, no, I'm not going to die on the hill for them. I am open to all sorts of possibilities, but not talking about them is a problem. And not giving the public sufficient time, even September 3rd, doesn't feel like enough time, because we have 22,000 people, and some of them beyond the ones that always show up at every meeting are going to want to say something. So I would love to continue the conversation, because my goal is to get towards a merger document that both boards can agree upon and we can share with the public with a straight face and a clean conscience. I can't do that right now.
Okay. So for the sake of being vulnerable and putting things out there, so what I hear is 3 and 3 needs to be taken care of, about addressing the duplicative ordinances, needing to have a planning summit, and needing to have more public input before there is agreement to finalize a charter. So yes. It's almost 9 o'clock. We can't do all 4 of these things before 9 o'clock. We can't do 2 of them before the end of the day today. So I guess, again, my question is, I don't want to waste people's time. Time is a very important thing to me. We will never get more of it back. Is it wasting our time to go through the charter right now as a joint board until we can resolve some of these other things? Which, from my perspective, is we as trustees, if we go forward tonight to put the charter as it exists tonight on the November ballot, I personally am totally fine in working on these other things as we do that.
Well, that's a question that I have for you. George said earlier that you cannot work simultaneously on Plan A and Plan B. And so if you're interested in moving forward and putting your version of the charter on the village ballot, then does that mean the select board is going to work by itself on the ballot or on the charter version that we have? Or are you going to continue to sit at the table with us? And what kind of message does that send? We're going to put this merger on the charter, on the ballot, but we're going to keep sitting at the table with the trustee, with the select board. My hope is that it doesn't go on the ballot in November and you continue to stay at the table. And then we don't have to, we can call it a night now, and we can schedule the necessary meetings and finish and get it all done and be in agreement on one document that won't confuse our voters.
So I've said a fair amount, and I'm also pretty big on the fact that I'm one trustee out of 4 others. So I see there are some other hands up, and I'd love to hear the others' opinions. And George, I think yours was up first. Although George, you're muted.
It's 105B that deals with the ordinances in the interim period. Maybe you have an older copy, but it's on the.
I have yours. I have yours right here.
Yeah, it's 105B. and that would be a priority of the interim body. But I want to go speak to what Andrew said. I guess we're a little confused because what I'm hearing is that the select board is not going to put this, is not interested in not going to, we could stay here until 3 o'clock in the morning, and we're not going to put this, you're not going to put this on the ballot in November. You're not comfortable doing that. And you've had very,
myself. No, I'm.
And you've had stated very valid reasons for that. Our reasons were we wanted to take advantage of the November election, and we were concerned that, and we still have concerns that the select board doesn't see this as a priority. That's what we've been picking up over the last few weeks, and that we still see in the village that high likelihood, no matter what we do, this will be defeated. And we want to be working, unfortunately, it sounds counterproductive, but we need to be thinking of what we're going to be doing as an alternative. So that I just wanted to clarify. Yes, I wanted to have a planning summit, and we wanted all these other things to go in there to address your question. But when suddenly it seemed like the two boards were going in different directions, it seemed like it was necessary for us to ask this question: where are you going? Where is the select board headed? I'm not sure we totally get that, but
Well, George,
I think a lot of the things that things like planning summits, ordinances, a charter is a living document. It can be amended anytime. Some communities have charter committees that just do nothing but amend their charters all the time. South Burlington, I think, is one. So there's nothing sacred. It's not like the U.S. Constitution or the New Testament or something. It can be revised anytime. So I just want to mention that. And I'll stop talking.
Well, I do appreciate that. And I certainly understand how you can feel that the select board does not have this on the highest priority, because some of the things that we've said and done in the last several meetings send the message that it's not a high priority for us. You know, like you said earlier, moving forward on Australian ballot, moving forward on 3-3, our conversations regarding the police. So I have to acknowledge, and I'm just speaking for myself personally, how very sorry I am that our discussions have been derailed in that way. And it was not our intention to drive the trustees away or make you feel like we are not interested in moving forward on merger anymore. Speaking for myself, in addition to the policing conversation and the day-to-day business of the town, which is significant, I pretty much have 2 jobs, and I have spent dozens of hours a week on this. It is foremost in my mind, and that's because I'm the chair, and I'm not asking or saying that the board members treat it the same way. But I will say that when your revised charter arrived in our mailboxes on Tuesday afternoon around 4 o'clock, but just before a board meeting, I know that every select board member spent a good 4 or 5 up to 10 hours reviewing that charter. And I've got multiple sets of notes from multiple board members who have really put their pencils to the paper and are working on this. We want this to work. It's just, I feel myself that there's some significant decisions that still need to be agreed upon. And I'm not asking for a planning summit. I was just pointing out that we did say we wanted one. But I do think we owe both planning commissions the courtesy of having them come meet with us to talk about their concerns. And we all have concerns about development. I think that's the least we can do is schedule one meeting where that happens. So I really, I don't see where we're going to come to much agreement on this. So in terms of putting it on the ballot, I think the trustees need to do what the trustees need to do. You have constituents who are in need. They are seeking change. There are constituents too, and we want to make sure that we're doing it right. Because yes, there can be a charter committee that it's ad hoc or whatever, and it addresses charter changes. But as Dan just said earlier, it's better to get it right the first time. And I want to be able to look at my constituents, all of them, whether they're from West Sleepy Hollow Road or they're from Park Street. I want to be able to look at them with a straight face and say, yes, I gave this charter change a due consideration, and you can trust me that it's the best interest of the town because I did this work for you because you voted for me to do it. So my conscience is really talking to me on this subject, and I feel strongly about it, as you can probably tell by now. So perhaps, yes, Andrew, maybe the time has come to make a decision as to whether each board is going to put this on the November ballot.
Before we do that, I do see there are some other people who have their hands up. I think Dan, I'm not sure if yours is up first or Patrick. If you don't mind, Dan, if you just want to go
up first. Yeah.
Okay.
We can go on to this ad nauseum forever, talking about this as we've done, banter back and forth. And my impression from 10 years on the board is ultimately you started out, Elaine, saying the elephant in the room was the 3-3 representation. That wasn't the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is taxation, equity. A misunderstanding of voting was we had somebody from the public comment about why does the village get to vote twice? Voting is tied to taxation. We're taxed twice. So people need to get aware of that, all right? There's nothing more than that, okay? So we're taxed twice, we get to vote twice. Like it or not, I'd rather not vote twice. I'd rather vote once, have one community. Or I don't want status quo. Status quo, as George talked about earlier, as I've said multiple times, status quo is intolerable. That's why this subject keeps coming up decade after decade for 6+ decades, over 6 decades. It needs to be addressed. One way or the other, you choose merger or you don't choose merger. And if you don't choose merger, I take that as you voting for separation. The town can take all their infrastructure, everything the town has outside of the village. The town inside the village keeps their infrastructure. We keep our tax bill. We do everything, and everything is done for you. We can come to agreements, MOUs, and share just as we could with any other community if we want to, for use of our rec programs, use of whatever we have. We do it already with the wastewater treatment plant. That's one of the gems that Andrew didn't bring up, that the town would get control of too, that the village owns, okay? So there's a lot more to be said here, but I'm just frustrated with this. We could go on and on. And how much public input do we need? Do we go to the public, and as soon as the public says something that disagrees with what language we put into the charter, do we create a new charter and amend the way we rewrote it? We could do this forever. It will never end. And as it keeps going on, and Raj brought up a good point, that 12 years, that's what we're giving up. We're phasing in. We're giving the tax equity is phased in over that period of time. As we go closer to it, this has been going on forever. There'll be no time left. It's just ridiculous. It really is ridiculous.
I hear the frustration of every village voter in what you're saying, Dan. I really do. I do want to remind everybody that the budget process is coming up. Whether or not we merge, we can sit down together and start dealing with capital budget, making sure that village projects are paid for by covered by town funds that are contributed to by the village. There's a lot we can continue to do simultaneously while we work on merger together, finish up by Thanksgiving, and get it on the ballot on town meeting day. I'm sorry, Pat, your hand's been up for a while.
No, it's okay. It was important stuff to get through, and what Dan brought up, I think, was a question that I want to ask that maybe it's out of line for me to say, but I think I want to ask it. Is that it does feel like the select board, is just not comfortable putting it on for November. It still feels like the trustees are going to put it on for a November vote, which respect. I mean, I know we're waiting on numbers, but I think that, or at least as politicians, we kind of all try to say the right thing about these numbers. But I think that it's relatively clear for those of us who have been in this a while that if the two communities separate, the town outside the village is going to see a sudden, very substantial tax increase. It is a natural cause of being a 34-ish square mile community that has a roughly equal population to paying what would be, same number of people living in a roughly 2 square mile community. the public works are going to be substantially more expensive. It's just the TOV is going to see a substantial tax increase. I don't know what that number is, but I know that that's what's going to happen. And maybe that hasn't been clear enough because it's been voted down so many times, or maybe it's just been that people don't want to acknowledge the reality of it. And I understand that the trustees and our constituents in the village are fed up. In the time of COVID, they don't have the money to continue to afford paying an inequitable bill. So if this is what's happening, trustees, if I may ask the question, are you going to move forward with separation? Like, is that the plan? Because if that's the plan and we know about it now, then, obviously us continuing to work on a merger plan, just at that point, it seems irrelevant. If you're absolutely good with putting it on November and then giving us, the select board, time to finish this document and then putting it on at town meeting and then, seeing if this merger has a chance of passing, then I think we should continue working. But if that's not going to happen, then let's decide it tonight. And if the trustees want separation for all the reasons I completely respect, that's the way you need to move forward for your constituents. I get that, but let's get the answer. Let's just say it now.
So Patrick, George, I see your hand is up. If you don't mind, I'll just
sorry.
I'll just say real quick. I hope you heard as we went around at the very beginning that merger is what I think all 5 of us trustees had said we ran on, and that's what we wanted to see happen. Similarly, I think I heard 4 out of the 5 select board members say something very similar to that. So that's the plan. There isn't a side plan. The plan is merger. Should merger not pass, that's when I think we as a village then need to say, look, what do you want to do? As we heard Dan say, as he said very well, status quo is intolerable. We're not going to keep that up. So
yeah, and I think
that's when we as a community go back and talk.
Yeah, that's real, and I absolutely respect that. I just, I think that, if we as a select board don't have enough time, and I don't think that we do to get out in November, I think March is more realistic for us. Are you as the trustees, what I'm asking is, are you okay giving us that time? Or are you going to put your ballot question on November? And then once November passes, if we on the select board haven't put it on there, are you going to say, okay, we've gotten our answer. Select board, do what you need to do until town meeting day. And then we can talk then? Or are you going to start moving once the vote happens in November?
So I think I think so. So what I think I hear you asking about is, are we okay with waiting until town meeting day? As one person, no, I'm not okay waiting until town meeting day. I want to hear from as many residents as I possibly can on this very, very important issue. And the way we can get the most amount of input is through a mailed ballot on a presidential election. That's how we get the most input. I think the other part of your question was, correct me if I'm wrong, if it passes, then what?
Apologies. Maybe I'm rephrasing. I mean, I know that you are going to put it on the November ballot, and I respect that. But what I'm asking is, are you then okay waiting for us on the select board to get our answer in March, pass or fail?
Well, yeah. If the village votes that the village wants to merge, then yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Think of this as the bellwether, if you will.
Okay. Yeah, that's the answer to the question I was trying to get at. Thank you.
But again, your question was about what do the trustees think? I'm one person. There are 4 others.
Hey.
There.
Yeah, Raj?
To go back to what Pat was saying, Elaine alluded to a very long list. And it seems that Dan had indicated earlier that, okay, sure, the Government Operations Committee may be willing to reconcile an issue like representation. But if we go ahead, this is just a hypothetical, if we go ahead with what's in front of us, we're comfortable with it, and the select board goes through that very long list and there's more than representation that's been changed, what's the process then? If I remember correctly from earlier in the meeting, it's we have to revote it in the village. And I guess we could do that on town meeting day. But is that what we're talking about doing? I just want to make sure I'm clear, because I'm assuming, based on the comments from the select board, that there will be many more differences in this document besides just representation. And I just want to have a clear understanding of where we're going. Because people get confused, as was alluded to before, people get confused, and there are other people, and there will be people that will play on that. And so simply we can make this process. We know this. We've been there. And simply we can make this process better for everybody. And I'm just curious how that would play out.
What I was referring to is each of us board members has certain sections that we have questions on, and those I think can be either resolved with a brief conversation amongst ourselves or a quick consult with Dan Richardson. I think the lion's share of them will be resolved in that way, but there's still the ones we've already talked about. Dawn, do you have something to add to that?
Well, I may have Susan has now raised her hand. I wasn't sure if she was still here. What I was going to say, and I'm not sure, Andrew keeps saying it's a big voter turnout. Are you aware that your question will be on a separate ballot, mailed separately from the general election ballot? So there's no guarantee that you're going to get a high return back on that separate question.
Yes, I do.
That's might be what Susan wants to talk about, so I'll yield the floor.
Susan, please join us.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, what Don said. So just want to make sure that was clear. That's all.
Okay. Thank you. Raj, is your hand up still, or is that left over? Okay, so George.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think the select board needs more time. You guys need more time. That's very clear. And the goal here isn't to coerce or pressure anybody. Okay. And Elaine, I like very much what you said. Pat, no, I don't think we're going to immediately move towards separation. I don't know what we would do. And Elaine's words were very encouraging. The idea that we would sit down together and actually look at capital budgets and figure out a more equitable way of sharing our resources so that we're not paying for, and if someone in the audience is still there, the village has its own capital costs. We have to fix our own streets, and then basically we contribute to the fixing of the town streets. The confusing factor is we do accounting for these things very different. We have two very different accounting systems. So it's very hard to get an apples to apples comparison of how it is. But us seating at the board who put budgets together, we get what's going on. And I like what Elaine has said, and I don't think any of the trustees are saying, we're going to walk away from the table, we're not going to work with you. I think the issue for the trustees is that we wanted to kind of call the question in the village about merger. That's kind of what we're saying. But we are still with you, working with you, with the select board. Merger wouldn't happen, okay? We can't force merger on our own in the village. Merger would only happen when the town, when you guys, the select board, okay, when you're comfortable and you put a merger charter on a ballot, whether it's in March or April, and the entire community votes on it, and the entire community has to pass it, and then if a merger charter also passes in the village, then that's the only way merger actually happens. And so we're saying we would do the first leg of that. What I think is kind of what I'm hearing Dan saying is that if our two charters were close enough, okay, they don't have to be identical. If they were close enough, that would probably be okay for the GovOps committee. If not, what we could do is, have another vote go out, another merger charter in the village that goes out with the town charter, so people in the village vote on it twice. But I'm guessing that wouldn't be necessary. But I think in terms of collaboration and cooperation, it's a long night. We've all had late night meetings. The select board, You guys, you had a bolt come at you from out of nowhere. We get that. You need more time to work this out. Okay, so I don't think it's fruitful. I don't want to take over the meeting. I just don't think it's fruitful to keep going on. I think the trustees have a decision to make about whether we're going to do something. And I think, Andrew, if I'm trustees, I think we're all very committed to continuing to work with the select board on all of this, right?
That's why I wanted to make sure the rest of you had a chance to say that.
So I agree. I think we've reached the end of the productive part of the conversation. We're all tired. We're all pushing ourselves to our limits right now. So we have a business item of possible action to place merger on the November ballot. Select board, I don't know that we even need to make a motion, perhaps a consensus of whether we need to make a decision tonight or we just continue working the way we've been working. What are your thoughts? Andy?
I don't think we can get to a final answer in 2 weeks by September 3rd, so I think we need more time, and I'm not ready to move forward with November vote.
Thank you. Pat, Vince, or Dawn?
Yeah, I'll chime in. Yeah, I'm in favor of kind of just working the way we've been working, getting as much done. Just do it until it's done.
Okay, Dawn?
I'm in favor of continuing to work on it so that we get everything right and it can be finalized by the March vote. But that said, I'm not going to discourage the trustees from putting it on their ballot and see where it goes.
Yeah.
Pat, I see you shaking your head.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree.
Okay.
I would agree with Dawn completely. And, encourage the trustees. They need to respect and watch out for their constituency. And I think, the time has long since come. We're in a very dramatic time, rough financial times for everyone. So, if this gives them more clarity, honestly, it's going to give all of us more clarity. Let's be clear. I don't want to pass this off as just something that they would discover. This is going to be extremely useful information for all of us. Just obviously, on the select board, we have more questions than we can get through realistically in the time we have available.
Yeah, so there's our consensus, trustees, and I deeply appreciate your respecting our process. It's difficult for us to move fast, and we want to get it right. So we appreciate your being respectful of our process. And at the same time, we utterly respect your urgency and what you're trying to do with your constituents. And we will wait and see what happens.
Sounds good. What I would say as well is I think we're probably going to take a little while to get the right language down for the motion. I don't know if you want to wait for us to do that or if you guys wanted to head on out. No hard feelings.
I'm more than happy to stay as part of this meeting, but if the rest of the board members wish to depart, we can adjourn the select board meeting, but it's up to the board. Dawn?
Make the motion that we adjourn for those that want to leave and let the trustees come up with their final wording.
Is there a second?
I will second, though I am going to be staying.
Understood. All those in favor of adjourning the select board portion of this joint meeting, please say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Nay. The ayes have it. So if you wish to depart, please do. But if you don't,
we need to do a roll call, right? So.
Oh, forgive me. Yes, Andy, because we're virtual. Can I get a roll call on that adjournment vote? Pat.
Aye.
Dawn.
Aye.
Vince.
Aye.
Andy.
Nay.
And Elaine, nay. Okay, so 3-2, the adjournment passes. I will be remaining as an audience member.
Select Board, thank you, and I look forward to working with you, continuing to work with you. And I know the rest of the trustees do as well. Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you. Evan, I was trying to look through emails because I know that I had a busy day at work and haven't been able to catch up. Do we have formal motion language to make sure we get this right?
Dan is back with us. Dan is back with us. I don't have it, but Dan could probably provide it because I think it is provided in state statute. Dan, can you jump in?
Yeah, I can jump in. It should follow, and let me just pull up the statute. Excuse me. Well, it would follow along the lines of shall the trustees approve the proposed merger of the village of Essex Junction with the town of Essex along the plan of merger.
So Dan, just to make sure I heard you right, it would be for the trustees to approve the proposed merger of the Village of Essex Junction with the Town of Essex along with the plan of merger. Is that what you're saying?
Right. Instead of along, you could say consistent with the plan of merger.
Okay, so consistent with the plan of merger. Would one of the trustees like to make that motion? And we can continue talking about it afterwards.
So moved.
Second.
Okay.
Dan, in your wisdom, does that work?
Yes, I believe that
Okay.
will get this process started.
Okay, I know that's how we typically do things, and this one seems a little important. So we have the motion on the table, and it has been seconded. Is there any further discussion on this item, on this motion?
Yes, I'm sorry, I gotta raise my hand here.
Go ahead,
So
Josh.
I just want to get clarity. So we approve this, but then we have about a 2-week window to really get the rest of the actual charter tightened up. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Roger, hand was up.
So again, I just want to be clear what we're doing. I'm sorry, but we're going to do this. We're going to vote in November. Trustees are going to, or Select Board's going to vote in, presumably, if they continue with it, they'll vote in September, March.
March.
Dan, Dan Richardson, how far apart can these be? I really don't want to do it twice. And I'm not going to lie, I'm a little uncomfortable not having more public input, although I think residents of the village are probably more on board with this than not, but I don't know. I'm on the fence, I'm not going to lie. I'm sorry.
Sure.
But I am curious how far apart they can be and still be legitimate.
So they can be any time within the legislative session. So if you pass this in November for the beginning of the biennium in the legislature, the town has really until 2022. Reasonably within that legislative session in 2022.
Dan, this is Evan. I think what he's talking about is the language within the merger plan. How close do they need to be?
I was, but that's actually brought up another question, but, and we'll get back to the original intent in a second, but, so Dan, if they have the entire biennium.
Right.
My question from earlier was, we've included in this merger document a 12.
Raj, can't hear you.
Yeah.
You're muted.
I didn't touch anything, I swear. My other question, sorry, was, well, to go along with the time frame question, we've aligned a phase-in of tax reduction or tax increases for the town outside of village to our bond payback of 12 years. So if the town takes time, and maybe the legislature doesn't take it up in the first year of the biennium, but takes it up in the second, will there be an opportunity? There's no opportunity probably to adjust that. To adjust that portion, and I don't know what section it is, I just closed my document, but we couldn't adjust that, basically, is what I'm thinking, right?
Correct. If you wanted to have it run like that, you might want to change, instead of saying 12 years, to have it run to a date certain.
Okay, it's something we have 2 weeks to adjust that if we decide we want to do that, right? So
correct.
And I guess the original, I asked my question poorly, but Evan's right. How much do these documents have to match in language and intent? There was a few utterances of dying on the sword in the select board, and I just want to make sure that, if it's more than representation, for instance, if there's something in the select board's version that they have a vastly different way they want to deal with ordinances, or they, ordinance reconciliation, and maybe some other things that we aren't back doing this vote again for village residents and having to explain it again. Because, and the reason why, I'm going to be quite honest, is the more opportunity for obfuscation and for misinformation, we're just opening ourselves up for trouble. So
sure. What I would say is, and this is a little bit unprecedented. Usually people get on the same page with a single merger plan, and it's usually then, you work out those kinks and you try and get it passed by the voters, as a compromise document. In a case like this, if there was a merger that was identical except for the provisions about the governance, I think the legislature would still take it up. It's my opinion, and that they would just simply fix that because the intent for merger would still be there. Once you start adding ordinances, maybe changing how bonding is done, you start to add different components to this, and it starts to look like two different ideas, and you really haven't reached that idea of merger. So there is that possibility, and I think that is a risk that the village does take by approving this now and locking themselves into one version of this merger. That if the trustees ultimately come up with a radically different version, you may very well find yourself in a position where you have to reapprove and revote a merger plan for it to be successful.
And by definition, we may have to skew to an area that we're not comfortable with if we want to save the merger. In other words, if the select board comes in March and with something different, and we don't like it necessarily, we're not crazy about it, but we want this to go through, we may have to adjust ours to meet theirs, or the whole thing dies.
That's correct. I mean, it becomes a little bit of a standoff situation.
Yeah.
Well,
thank you.
Can I just
go ahead, Dan?
I thought Dan Richardson mentioned earlier that when this goes to the legislature, to GovOps, they're going to look at that, Raj, and I think we still have time, even though the plan may be, different than what we initially thought it would be in March, whatever the select board comes up with. It sounds like once it gets down to Montpelier, there still is time for the parties involved to work out the details. It's, Dan liking it to a marriage. I mean, it's kind of like you got this prenuptial agreement, but the prenup is still amendable up until the point where where it's blessed by the state or the justices say, now you're together. I think we still have the opportunity. Is that true?
To a certain extent. Again, it's one of those things where it just depends on whether you're talking about the small details or the big ones. But I think it is fair to say that if it's a matter of working out some of the minor details, GovOps can step in and help smooth that over. It's just every one of these steps, especially once you get into the legislature, you start moving away from formal process and into legislative process, which often depends upon, mores of the committee, its willingness, how far it's willing to go or not go, and what process they feel comfortable with. And that depends on the makeup of the committee.
So, trustees, we have the motion on the table. Is there any further conversation on the motion?
I do want to just echo. I do want to echo Raj's. I think we're all feeling a little strange. This is a monumental step. I'm willing to vote for it, but I do admit. Yep, it's a big step, and there's a lot of uncertainty. I don't know if there are any big landmines that we're not aware of that we could be walking onto. I'm not aware of them. Maybe I don't want to put Dan Richardson on the spot, but any big disasters that we could be making by doing this, Dan? Anything that we're is this a major misstep? I don't want to put you on the spot, but is there something glaring about this that we might want to be thinking about?
Well, I think there's two questions here. From a legal perspective, I think you're fine. You're acting consistent, and the fact of the matter is, as I said before, if the town never votes for a merger, this is just simply a vote that may be counted as a measure of the political will of the village. At the same time, as far as any type of risks, I think they're much more on the strategic and political, which is, you do lock yourself into this version and you do essentially freeze it. And that may be a gambit that, you basically go to the town and say, this is our version. We've locked ourselves and committed to it, and give them some pressure to follow what you've taken the first step on. At the same time, that can easily backfire, and you could have the town create something, you give them sort of license to go even further, because they know, well, if we change even these things that we really care about, we're going to have to change a lot more. So let's make up our dream version of it. And you're kind of left with then either you redo it, as you've mentioned, or not. And then you end up with the situation, I think it was a few years ago, where the legislature had competing versions of merger, and they basically said, go back and work it out. But I don't see, in the sense that, the worst thing that could happen, I guess, from a sort of commitment point of view, is you pass this and the town passes the exact same thing, and you get sort of no further cut at it. But that's sort of what you want as well. That's not really a trap. That's just a consequence of doing this. I don't think it changes, simply because you do have all these additional steps. It's not as if it's a decision that is going to take effect tomorrow or the day after Election Day.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. And I do want to, again, I know I'm holding up the vote, but it's worth it for a few more minutes, guys. You okay? Everyone with me? I know, Amber, you still awake? Okay. I want to throw us one scenario out there, guys and gals. I want to just throw something out. So we go out, and I'm not trying to get cold feet or something like that, or buyer's remorse, or whatever. I'm just saying, let's think through. Let's say we put this out there and it goes out, and the answer comes back a resounding no. We don't want to merge. So I just want to think through the logic of that. What does that mean? That means that we want to do what? We want to just maintain the status quo?
We don't know.
We want to separate? I mean, what's the next step after that?
What it says is, if I can, George, what it says is that they didn't want to merge.
Okay.
We can't then say that that we must separate. It doesn't then mean that we must remain in the status quo. And that's where it becomes incumbent upon us to make sure that we are talking with the community and that we understand what they want. As a part of that educational process. It's not if this happens, then we must do that. And just real quick, I want to say that, Annie, I know your hand is up. Typically, once we've gone to this point, this is really the board-only conversation. Let us finish this side, and then we may go back for more public comment. So just hang on.
Okay, just wanted to think that through.
I think, George, you mentioned being at the open and outside event, and I've certainly heard surprise from some people about the phase-in. I don't think anybody really knows what anybody thinks in the village about that. And I think if there's dying on swords for 3-3, then there's opportunity to revisit some of that. I know we're thinking that the representation be worked out by GovOps, and that may be fine. But I mean, just as one trustee, I don't know how my neighbors feel about that. And I don't want to find out the hard way that wasn't something that they were willing to do. They would have much rather done something else. And I won't have that answer from just simply a up or down vote in November.
Yeah.
I'll still have to go out and talk to hundreds of people, and I could have done that ahead of time while we were working with working with the select board. We've been all getting a lot of comment from people, and really thinking hard about this. And I just don't know if I can. I don't see the harm in waiting for town meeting day.
Yeah,
we're not going to get anybody any tax relief any sooner by waiting for town meeting day. I'm sorry, we're just not. And we might get them some clarity, but we're not going to get them any tax relief. And I think we'll have a big leg up with the select board and the town as a whole by working with them and coming up with whatever we can come up with. And we're so close. We're so close. And this is probably not going to be a big deal, but we haven't done. We had one public outreach, and the result of that public outreach was a lot of folks in the town outside the village looking at it, going, "Oh, wow, this isn't so bad. Look at what the village is doing to make it better for us." And that was only one opportunity, and we never really had one in the village. So I'll stop. That's kind of where I'm at.
Go ahead, Dan.
Well, I disagree with what Raj is saying somewhat. I believe that the people have had opportunities just as much as during the joint meeting session. People have opportunities to weigh in on this subject all throughout the year, just as much as with town meeting. People come and think the only chance they had to vote or to talk to the select board was at town meeting when they're going to vote on a budget that's been worked on, for months on end. No, you can come at any time. You can, speak to your rep, or whoever nearby can do. So I disagree with that. I think, sure, there are people out there that aren't aware of some of the stuff, but I think there is a swell of motion to get something out there this year. They wanted to, and I look at this, as you said, Andrew, it'll be a bellwether. It'll give us indication. And even if we did wait, Raj, like you were saying, Raj, there's no guarantee come March that the people are going to vote for it then. So then what do? We give up at that point and say, now, I think we should move forward now.
Okay, George, we'll come back to you, Raj.
And I don't know if Amber wants to speak, but no, what surprised me at the open outside was a number of people who said, why aren't we separating from the town? I hadn't heard a lot of that, and I haven't been hearing a lot of that, and yet all of a sudden I'm hearing a lot of that. And of course it's anecdotal. We're 11,000 people. So, eight or 10 people come and say, why aren't we separating? Why can't we just create our own city? Why can't we just break away and get away from all this? So that in my mind, that's part of the conversation that we need to be having about putting a merger vote out there. But by saying, we're proposing to merge with the town, does that set us up? Does that slant the conversation that we have with the people in the village about, people, are they thinking, okay, I really would like to separate. These guys are merging, so I don't want to talk about it. I that's all I'm saying. I mean, you guys understand what I'm saying? I've heard a lot of that talk, and it has surprised me. I just wanted to throw that out there, and I'm afraid that I'm just trying to get the calculation here of how putting this out here and saying we want to merge, and if it's defeated, and the real desire of the majority of people in the village is that they want to separate from the town, have we taken a misstep in letting that happen? I can't see how, but I'm just wanted to make sure. I want to do what the people in the village want to do. I'll shut up.
So, Raj, you wanted to go?
No, just really quick, George. I think the other scenario that may be unlikely, but the other scenario is that finance director brings the community numbers, and folks in the village go, maybe this is far-fetched. Folks in the village go, oh, we'll take that option, separate.
Yeah.
Why isn't that on the ballot in November? I mean, I would really hope not. I still think in my heart we're better together. But if we put something out there and they say, no, separating's much worse, why are we doing a 12-year phase-in? How do we explain that? Like, if I'm not talking about having the upper hand or whatever, but people are going to look at the big picture. They're going to say, oh, no, why are we phasing it in for them? It'd be much worse for them if we separated. Separating is almost as impossible as merging. So I'm not under any impression that it's easy. But we don't know the scenarios, and I hate to say it.
Dan, your hand is still up. Is that new?
Oh, glad to see him, sorry.
Okay. So a couple things I just wanted to say with regards to public input, as I had said before, we've been having this conversation for 50, 60 years. This isn't a new conversation. There's nothing new in this charter that hasn't been in previous charters, with the exception of the tobacco ordinance and 331. Other than that, philosophically, do you want to merge? We have done this many, I'll say it one more time, many times. This really isn't that new. And the 12-year phase-in, that part is new. So other than those three things, this has all been talked about numerous times over the years. In terms of, does this then risk us to be locked in? Yeah, it does. It is what it is. I don't have anything to say about that. The other thing that this does is, as we heard again today, as we heard in 2006, when the merger vote did pass before it got overturned by fewer people turning out, it solves the issue of the village voting twice. And why does a village get to vote twice? Because we live in two municipalities, as we know. If it passes in the village, then in the town outside, or then town-wide, if it's voted on again in town meeting day. Those are two separate voting acts. And so instead of having the villagers vote twice as being residents in two municipalities, you vote once in November, you vote once again come March. So I think that in some ways also helps to solve that. I hear the point about, I've said this is a bellwether. We can continue down that path. There's nothing like the 11th hour throwing out another option. The other option is we just ask the question, do you want to merge? Yes, no. Do you want to separate? Yes, no. There's another bellwether. I think we lose out on so much by doing that in terms of being able to stop the village from voting twice on the same article. I think we really lose out on the ability to say, look, this is what passed in the village, this is what the village wants. But it does add that portion of having a separation thing on the ballot, which again, none of us ran on that. So I think that's also going counterintuitive to what we've all been voted onto these seats for.
Okay. All right.
So we have a motion on the table. It has passed. It has seconded. Last call for comments from the board. Okay, so if the board is okay, typically we don't do public comment at this point in time. Would you like to open it up for public comment?
Sure.
Fine.
I just want to say before we do this, it needs to be very, very brief. I'm talking a minute. I will have my clock ready. If you'd like to speak to the board about this issue, please, now is the time to do so. You can raise your hand in Teams. You can use the chat feature. If you're not using Microsoft Teams, please be patient until the silence comes in. When the silence comes in, go ahead and start. Annie, I know you wanted to speak first. So Annie Cooper, you have the floor.
Can you hear me or see me? Yeah, thank you. I feel like I shoved at you guys so hard, and I'm so like, I know I didn't do anything except talk, but I just am. I'm feeling all the feelings that y'all are feeling, and I feel a little nervous because losing strategy has never been a good idea. And when Dan said that, lawyer. Sorry, I don't know. I can't think of his last name. Richardson. When Dan Richardson said that about loss of strategy, that made me concerned. And then my other comment is watching Andy and Elaine vote nay so that they could stay committed to teamwork in the conversation made me wonder what it would feel like to not completely be at the table in the conversation about the document that goes to the entirety of the town. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. Anybody else? All right, that's the 30-second mark. Nobody else had asked to speak. Board members, motion's on the table. It has been seconded. So again, if we pass this, what that means is that means that we put the draft, or we put the charter motion onto the November ballot, which, yes, is separate from the presidential ballot, same time frame. If that voted down, then we don't do it. So all those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, so we'll do a roll call. Dan?
Aye.
Amber?
Aye.
George?
Aye.
Raj?
Nay.
Andrew? Aye. So 4-1, that passes. Thank you for those in attendance for sticking with us. And that brings us into the reading file with board member comments. Anything else we haven't talked about?
The only thing I'll say is that we're going to have to probably, I think we all need a break, but I don't think we're going to get one, unfortunately. We're going to have to try to buff this charter up fairly soon. So, I'll be the one who's sending that out and trying to push everybody. I'll take that responsibility, but unfortunately, guys, it's going to mean, a little bit more work. I wish we could take a couple of weeks off.
What would the board think about, again, in terms of collaboration? What do you feel about if I were to send a message to Elaine and ask about if she would be willing to reach out to the select board and ask select board members to give us their die on the hills so that we could see what we could fold into that charter?
Sure, that's good.
Yep, that sounds good.
Because again, one thing I want to be very, very clear on, and I'm happy to see there are still some select board members here, I don't want this to be viewed as the trustees are going out on their own. They don't want to work with the select board. We've put up the fists and we're fighting. That is not the point. That was not what this was intended to do. And so anybody who goes ahead and does that is absolutely not paying attention to the words that we're saying and is misconstruing the truth. So I would appreciate anybody who hears things like that, reach out to us, let us know. Mr. Evan, your hand is up.
And I have to make sure I'm not muted. That was not a dig at you, Raj. Sorry. I think it would be great if the select board would approve sending their comments over to George, and though as many of those can be incorporated, that would be great. And we still need to give Dan Richardson time. So it's as you know, it's a quick turnaround. And George, I'll be happy to work with you on that.
So from that process standpoint, Evan, if I can just jump in, we meet next on the 25th, and that's our last meeting where we have the first like half hour, 45 minutes, and then the select board joins us, right?
Sounds right.
And so then we are not scheduled to meet again until after that September 3rd deadline to be able to reconcile the select board's must-haves with ours. Maybe on the 25th, one of the agenda items could be whether or not the trustees need another meeting.
I may suggest that you start thinking about what dates after the 25th you actually can meet, and then how you would warn them. So, you know, you've got the 27th, the 31st, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, on the 25th, you can call another meeting. You need, what, 2 days' notice?
Unless it's an emergency.
Well, okay. But certainly between 25th.
How about I'll pull the trustees on, I don't have my work calendar in front of me.
No.
How about I'll send an email to the trustees asking about which days may work. Anybody have anything else? Somebody want to make a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
Second.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Raj. Any further discussion on adjourning? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? That's it. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks, you too.
Right.